Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Town of Fairfax Community Workshop for the Housing Element Update. We will begin with Director Ben Berto. Mr. Berto, take it away.
Thank you, Tamla. Hi, I'm Ben Berto, the Director of Planning and Building and Services for the Town of Fairfax. Town officials and my colleagues are undertaking a major effort to plan for future housing in Fairfax through an update of the town's general plan housing element, as required by the state of California. Thank you for taking your Saturday afternoon to participate in this workshop with us. The state is requiring that Fairfax plan for the development of 490 housing units in Fairfax in the next 8 years. A majority of these units will be affordable, and this is a challenge the town embraces, particularly since it will help us to affirmatively further fair housing as directed by the state. You will see us working cooperatively with you today and in the coming weeks and months to learn your needs and plan for housing to meet those needs. Today, or when it's convenient for you in the next 2 weeks, on the fairfaxspeaks.com website, I invite you to participate in learning more about the housing element update, the state's housing requirements, different options for where housing could be located, and most importantly, to share your views on Fairfax housing in this planning process. I understand your concerns about housing in Fairfax. Fairfax appealed its 490 unit housing allocation. However, it's unknown whether this will be successful. We are continuing to plan for those units to make this housing the best possible fit for our town. And to do that, we need your help. Our housing planning process will review challenges including fire safety, water supply, traffic, etc. We will also explore topics such as housing for school employees, workers in our local community, and senior residents who may be in danger of being forced out of their residence. An important part of our effort will be learning about the housing needs and challenges for lower income individuals, the disabled, and minority groups. People who have previously been excluded from participating in this type of a housing planning discussion. In short, we will need to work together in transforming how Fairfax housing is discussed, where it's planned, and what it is built. We are relying on you to share your housing ideas and desires for Fairfax so that we can best meet these needs. I would also like to extend a brief invitation to our Spanish-speaking viewers. Buenas tardes. Soy Ben Berto, el Director de Planificación y Construcción del Pueblo de Fairfax. Me gustaría invitarlos a participar en la planificación de viviendas en nuestro pueblo. No tendremos información traducida hoy, pero las próximas 2 semanas traduciremos esta información para ustedes. Inicie sesión el sitio web de Fairfax Speaks en 2 semanas y podrás ver nuestra discusión sobre vivienda en español. Gracias por su interés. I will now hand things off to Sam Sue.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Suter. I have the distinct honor of introducing our team today. First off, we have Andy Flower. Andy is a principal planner with EMC. He's supported by Lauren. I don't know how to even say your last name, Lauren.
Her.
Lauren, yeah.
Perfect. Lauren Her. And she's also works with Andy at EMC as well. Then we have Rachel Kane. She's been the master behind this interactive tool that we will unveil to you here probably in the next 2 hours or so. We also have Kristen Masters, who's joining us as a volunteer from Santa Cruz Nonviolent Communication. So we're thrilled and honored to be here. You will hear from each of the team. Oh, I also want to give a shout out to Tamala. She's been our tech support wrangling us through this process. And so you will hear her throughout. You also heard her voice as the intro. So she's our North Star with all things Zoom tech support today. So thanks, Tamala. Nice to be here with this great team. give you a rundown of what to expect today. We have about a 15-minute or so introduction. We'll also cover some Zoom details. We want to make sure that you all feel comfortable engaging with us through the Zoom platform. So we'll run through some of those details pretty briefly. Then we'll jump into what we're calling part one. That is the intro to a housing element. We'll talk about what that actually means, what a housing element is. We'll discuss this concept of leading with equity. Andy will give a great run through of that. And that will also lead into a more in-depth introduction about what a housing element is. Lauren will be our guide through that part of the process. After the intro to housing element, we'll have a brief pause for some Q&As. So I already saw that there's a few questions in the Q&A function. So as we go along, if you have any questions or if you have any off the top of your head now, please enter them into the Q&A feature of Zoom. And that will help us make sure we're capturing your questions and then answering them throughout the presentation today. Then we'll have about a 50-minute or so section about this topic called sites inventory. So if you're wondering what that is, that's great. Hopefully we'll answer your questions about what a sites inventory is, give you an overview about the sites we're looking at, and then we'll have another more in-depth Q&A session after that. So after all of part one, we'll have a moment and some space to hear from you directly and have a little more interaction with you in this space. We're targeting about a 10-minute intermission, and that will be probably around 4 o'clock. So we think the first part will take about 2 hours. And then after that is what we're calling this interactive exercise. So we're really excited to share this tool with you. In case you have to jump off or come back throughout any part of this presentation, we want you to know that we're recording this. And all of these materials, everything we're covering today will be available online, including the interactive tool. So if you have to miss any part of the presentation, please don't feel like you're going to miss anything, because it will all be available for you online. And I saw Rachel is already using the chat, and she sent a link to Fairfax Speaks. So that's your home base for a ton of information that we're going to share with you today, as well as in the future. So for the next few slides, I'm going to give you kind of a primer on Zoom and how to engage with Zoom. So for this first one, I believe Tamala has a polling question that you should see on your screen. I'll read it out for you. So this is just a warm-up exercise, and we want to know what your favorite season is. Choices are spring, summer, fall, and winter. And if you can't see it all, you might have to scroll down on your screen so you can see all 4 of those responses. And then when you have a moment, select it, select your choice, and then submit. Give you a couple more minutes. Tamala, are we getting some responses in yet?
We have. I see 75% of the people have participated. If you are one of the 25% that has not, please note that this poll window may have bounced around on your screen. If you're in full screen, you can hit escape to escape that full screen and find it. Otherwise, it may be right in the center of your screen. Go ahead and pick an answer. It is anonymous. Oh, I do see that upped a little bit, and I believe it is time to close with 80% participating.
All right. And I'm also keeping an eye on the chat, and we had a really good question that's timely. So Tamala, how many people are joining us right now, if you don't mind chiming in with that response?
We have 24 attendees right now.
Great.
And dun, da, da, the answer to the poll results is, it does look like fall is the favorite season by 39%, and spring and summer have been split next in the decision with 30%.
Great. I see we don't have any winter lovers here. Good thing we're in California.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tamala. So throughout the presentation, we have a few more polling questions for you, and they'll be a little more content specific, but now I feel confident moving forward that we have an audience that can use the poll. So thank you all for participating in that warm-up exercise. Few other methods that you can communicate throughout the time today. So the first one is chat. I saw a couple chats already in the Zoom messaging, so that's great. I feel like you guys are tech savvy just seeing the responses so far. So I won't go spend too much time on this, but you should have a Zoom toolbar that you can see all of your methods of engagement. So chat is the first one that we'll want to hear from you today. There's also the raise hand button. So at key points throughout the day, we might want you to raise your hand if you want to speak, provide a comment or a question, and we'll prompt you when those opportunities are. And then there's the Q&A. So I think this is the most important feature because as we go through, we're going to present a lot of information at you today, and we really want it to land. We want to make sure that you come away from this workshop understanding what we're presenting. So if anything's unclear or if you want additional information, please put that in the chat or in the Q&A function. That way we can be sure to answer your questions. And if we don't get to all of your questions today, we will respond to them in writing and provide that information online. So please know that we take those questions very seriously, and we will provide answers to those, whether it's today in the workshop or online after the workshop as well. One other thing to note about the Q&A, you can vote someone's question up. So there's a little thumbs up symbol, and you can click on that to express that you have the same question, and then that way we can crowdsource which questions are rising to the top. So that's a quick run through with Zoom logistics. If you have any other questions and you need some tech support, we have a few panelists in the background that are helping to manage those. So please reach out to us. We want to make sure that this is a meaningful experience today and that we hear from you. So it's very important that you feel comfortable with the Zoom logistics. So now I'll hand it off to Kristen to set some ground rules today.
Great. Welcome, everybody. First, I want to start with a short land acknowledgement. I just want to invite all of us to acknowledge that Fairfax is located on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Miwok people. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and all of its ancestors, past, present, and emerging. So we get to notice the land that we're on, the peoples that have existed before on these lands. And I want to invite you into, hopefully these ground rules are really invitations to have us work well together today, to have everyone feel like they have a chance to be heard and to speak what's important to them. So we encourage you to speak from your own experience and your own social location. That may be a new phrase to you or not, but we all come in with identities and with ways that we exist in the world that others don't. So we want to be aware of speaking from our own and sharing space with brevity. So some of us, you might identify as somebody who it's easy to speak into a group. And if that's true, then you want to maybe take a step back and let others come forward. And if it's sometimes hard for you to speak into a group, then we encourage you to step forward, move forward. That we all get the opportunity to listen to and understand what matters to each speaker. So you're listening for what they value, what they care about as they talk. There are no right or wrong answers, and we'll really attempt to not interrupt one another, to have an atmosphere that's respectful of each person's dignity and what they have to say. So I wanted to give you that invitation and see if there's anything that you want to add, you can put it into the chat. If there's something that would settle your system as you embark on an afternoon of housing element, then you can add that into the chat. So now, some of you might recognize names of other participants and some of you might not, but we want to kind of get some sense of who's in the room, and we're going to do this metaphorically. So we want to invite you to think, what part of the home would you feel like represents you today? So this is like a little playful metaphorical thinking. Are you someone who represents the kitchen or the front yard, the backyard, the hallway, the bookshelf? So you just get to think about that and see how you're coming into this. And I want to encourage you to put some of those answers into the chat so that we get a way to meet each other. Thank you, Rachel, for putting that into the chat. And as you do that, then we'll move on. The front door, the office, the garden, the sky, the home office. Many more of us have been part of that. The sunroom. You get to start to imagine what you represent in your home and what you represent in this town of Fairfax. What part of it do you most associate yourself with? Okay, we'll move to the next piece. I'm not sure who does that. I believe it's Andy, but I'm not sure.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much for that, Kristen. Welcome, everybody. And Kristen, I know your time is valuable, and we'll say farewell if you need to travel on. And thank you for your time. So today we're beginning again to talk a little bit about the housing element, and we want to make sure that we're meeting everybody where they're at and what you may or may not understand about what the housing element is and why we're updating it. So we have a little bit of a prelude here, a couple of slides. Most importantly, we want to welcome you to the process. And if you're new to the process, we want to let you know you're right on time and we're glad you're here. And today's goal is to meet you wherever you are in your understanding of the housing element update and to include you with our visioning process. So just generally, we'll talk today about what the housing element is, why it matters, equity in the housing element and why that's so important, and what site inventory is, because that is our role, particularly right now, and we'll let you know a little bit about what your role is. Our intention today is to inform the community about this visioning process and ways that you can contribute to the discussion and decisions that Council will be making for the future of housing in Fairfax. This workshop is being recorded, videos will be available, organized by each section of today's presentation. We anticipate bringing a sites inventory report to Council mid-December, and now is the time to learn about the potential sites and share your ideas, comments, and opinions. Thank you. So where we're at currently, we have a safety element that is in draft form and has been brought to the Planning Commission for initial review. And if you're wondering why we're focused on sites option right now, sites options, or it's because it is essential for our next step, which is the CEQA decision-making process. We need to understand which sites we'll be using so that we can initiate the environmental review. So our future discussions will be around policy options and affordability. Leading with equity. This is a new requirement for the housing element update process. As Ben mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that we are focused on affirmatively furthering fair housing. The law is also known as AB 686, and the goal is to create a more inclusive Fairfax. So through this, we need to understand the impacts of past segregation and to include meaningful actions within our draft housing element update that address those past segregation patterns and any barriers that folks may have had to gaining housing in Fairfax. Your participation is essential to creating our housing plan. We want to make sure that the Fairfax housing plan update represents your core values, your vision of future housing, creates a more inclusive Fairfax community, and meets the regional and state mandated housing goals. And now Tamala will offer a poll. The poll question is asking you how confident do you feel about your knowledge of the housing element update process coming into it today.
And we are almost at 50%. So if you're in the other 50%, please do answer. This information is very important to us. There should be a small pop out that asks, how confident do you feel about your knowledge of the housing element process? We are, seems tabled out at 72%. So we'll do a going, and poll has ended. And the results are 38% are somewhat confident with this process. 35% are confident and 27% are unsure.
Thank you, Tamala. There are no wrong answers here. This helps us gauge what information we might be able to make available to you. We'll be asking the same question at the end of the slideshow, and hopefully will contribute to your knowledge. And with that, Lauren, I'm going to hand the presentation to you for the next section.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to dive into some of the details of what a housing element is so that, as Andy said, we can have you feel a little bit more confident about the process. So the best way to think about the housing element is that it's really a plan. It's a way for the town to plan for the current and future needs of housing in Fairfax. And as Andy mentioned, it's important that we plan for creating housing opportunities for people of all income groups. In the housing element, while it isn't the role of the town to build the actual housing units, we do need to develop targeted programs and policies to make it possible to build the required housing units. This includes providing details on where new housing should go and how many units could be on potential sites. Not only is the housing element update important in that it helps plan housing in a way that helps your neighbors and your community, but it's also a process that is required by law. The housing element is part of Fairfax's general plan and is required to be updated every 8 years. For this update, we need to plan for housing needs from 2023 to 2031. A technical piece of the housing element process that you may hear about is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, with the acronym RHNA and commonly pronounced as RHNA. This is referring to the target number of housing units that are assigned to Fairfax. There's more information about the details of this allocation process on our Fairfax Speaks website, but the key detail to take away today is that it's assigned to Fairfax by the state. So the target number that Fairfax was assigned from the state is 490 units. This table shows the breakdown of how many units the state wants Fairfax to plan across different income groups. You can also see in the second column how these numbers for Fairfax relates to the units required to be built across Marin County. And remember that in this process, we're planning for how these housing units how the 490 housing units will be built between 2023 and 2031. Another way to look at our target number of housing units, the 490, is when we look at it spread across different income levels. The distribution of these units was also assigned by the state and is based on demographic and economic data for the town and the region. In this process, equity and public feedback are really the common thread, and they'll be woven throughout each step of the process. Some of the key components of our final plan will be looking at Fairfax's current and future housing needs, the challenges and opportunities in meeting these needs, identifying the sites where this is possible to build the 490 units, and updating the housing plan for Fairfax with specific and targeted policies and programs so that this is possible. But all of this isn't just looking at the data. We need to hear your stories, and your public engagement and feedback will help shape the programs and policies that we come up with. So on this slide, it's important too that we create a plan that meets the requirements of the state. The penalties for non-compliance have increased in scope and severity over the past few housing element cycles. A key difference is the state now has a dedicated department for ensuring compliance. If we don't complete the housing element update, some of the consequences are listed here. I won't go through them in detail, but you can read more about this on the Fairfax Speaks site. And now I'm going to hand it off to Tamala for a poll to see how you're feeling.
And it should be up on your screen now. How comfortable do you feel about adding 490 housing units in Fairfax? Thank you for your participation. I do see we have about 48% of 32 people right now. I'll give you just a little bit longer. And with this, we will count down. If you have not placed your answer yet, now is your time. How comfortable do you feel about adding 490 housing units in Fairfax? And 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, Tamala.
And there we see it. There are 57% of the people on this call who are comfortable with adding 490 housing units. 13% would be comfortable adding more. 30% understand the consequences and still would like less than 490 units. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone who participated. This information is certainly helpful. As we mentioned earlier, we're needing to get started with our sites inventory process so we can keep moving with our environmental review. I saw a couple questions in the Q&A about what a sites inventory is, or excuse me, about what a, I'm sorry, Sam, I see that you're the lead on this slide. I got a little ahead of us.
Oh, no problem, Andy. I think you're on the same page though, so it might be worth you still being here to answer some of these questions. I saw one question about what is CEQA and a safety element. That might be a good clarifying question to add right now.
Absolutely, it's great timing because we'll be talking about them in just a minute and providing a better understanding of how these have factored into our determining our potential sites inventory. So our safety element is a chapter in the general plan. The general plan is a document, a visioning document for a 20-year cycle and is required in each community within California. So the town of Fairfax has a general plan, and there is a requirement, a state law, that when you update the housing element, you must also look at the safety element. And so part of our team has been working diligently to create that draft update. And through that lens, we've also been paying close attention to the safety concerns in anticipating which sites might be appropriate for our inventory. And I did mention CEQA earlier, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And that's an important term to understand for environmental review. So when there is a change to a chapter within the general plan, it's essential that it gets reviewed for according to the California Environmental Quality Act. So and that takes some time because there's many different factors that need to be considered. So our team needs enough time to understand the where of this housing element update. In other words, our site inventory. And so that's why this is our beginning step. We will talk a little later about what our next steps are. Any other questions, Sam?
Yeah, there are a few more. So we're doing well on time right now. So I think it's important to address some of these questions right off the bat. So there's one about if ADUs count toward meeting the target. I know we're gonna answer that later, but Ben, did you say you wanted to answer that question now, or at least tee up what we're going to talk about a bit more?
Sure. Yes, they do count towards it and have been counted in our current housing element.
Great, short and sweet. Then I want to express a comment here, and I think Andy, just knowing you, I think you would be a good one to take this. So I'll paraphrase a little bit, but there's just some concern about the process, and especially people without internet or people who are uncomfortable using Zoom, and they want to ensure that there's a good representation of the community in this process. So do you mind addressing that concern for the group right now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, with COVID, we've all understood that Zoom has become a necessity for many of our public meetings, but we are also cognizant of the importance of equity and how we can make sure to bring this information and make it available to folks, potentially maybe even in person. We'll be working with the library and finding different ways that we can bring this information to everyone who wants to be a part of the process. We'll also be taking some extra steps to make sure that those who have not been a part of a process like this in the past, that we provide some inroads. Great.
Here's another one that I'm not sure between Ben and Andy who might take this, but it's about the question gets at if there's anything available to help create affordable housing, and it, the commenter mentions just how expensive it can be to build on properties, especially when you factor in water and electricity and utilities and property taxes. So do either one of you have a response to that question?
I can give it a go. We'll be talking a lot about policy in our next phase of outreach. And so we're going to be bringing forward many different ways to encourage and incentivize and partner for affordable housing opportunities to become a reality. So there will be more on that later, but first we have to think about where Fairfaxians would like to see this housing be built in the future.
All right, and how about two more? The last one's a good segue to what we have next, but here's a question about if we can make the new units car-free.
I love that question. Ben, I see you unmuting. Do you want to take this one?
Well, it's a challenge, and part of it is envisioning a future where we are delinking housing with automobiles. We're starting to see that with how people are using mobility choices besides automobiles. The state has also, to a certain extent, directed how we provide parking for housing or not, as the case may be. So to a certain extent, the state is setting the tone if you're near transit stops and other modes of transportation.
All right, and then I think for this session and for everyone who's still with us and those who have just joined, this is just the first of a few Q&As. So there's more opportunities for questions. Keep using the Q&A. This is helpful for us to make sure we're answering your questions. But this is one that I think is a good segue to the next slide. So I'll let you take it, Andy. But the question is, how are the additional housing, as well as the current residents, going to have safe egress in case of a fire, earthquake, and flooding emergencies?
Oh, you're right. That is a great segue. Of course, this isn't something that can be guaranteed, but what we are making sure of is that it will be the safest possible according to our analysis and the research and expertise that we embrace through drafting our safety element. Ben has worked closely with his GIS specialist to map out the one-way in single, help me here, Ben, how do you phrase it?
One-way in and out are single egress roads.
And so that has been taken into consideration as we've moved forward in the initial steps of our site inventory potential sites.
Yeah, and I'd also again bookend by saying that this is a very dynamic topic, and the level of knowledge about how to make things safe is increasing all the time. And the good news is that Fairfaxians have a central role to play in ensuring the safety of our community in the future. So we're learning all the time. We are incorporating that newly gained knowledge into our planning efforts, including specifically the safety element update, which is a companion to the housing element update. And we will be bringing a lot of information to the public and to decision makers as we go through this process about how to do exactly that.
All right. I think just to keep us moving along, we respect everyone's time and want to stay roughly on schedule. So Andy, do you want to kick off the next series of slides?
Happy to. Thank you, Sam. As I was mentioning, in order to get started with our site inventory, we first, thank you for the next slide. We first identified specific sites that are available and reasonable for at least 490 housing opportunities to be constructed between the years 2023 and 2031. We recognize the possibility that rezoning or adopting programs and policies will likely be necessary for many of these sites, particularly those that have been used in our last cycle. So we have all of the sites that we'll be talking about today available on fairfaxspeaks.com. And I think Rachel might put that address in chat if she hasn't already. Next slide, please. So the way we've initiated our process for discovering our potential sites inventory, we started with everything on the table, which means all sites would be considered initially, and we would factor in the public comments, environmental and safety constraints, sites used in previous housing elements, zoning capacity, property owner intentions, and what's coming up soon are the objective development and design standards, objective design and development standards. And as was mentioned briefly, ADUs as opportunities throughout the town. Thank you. Here we have a slide of the wildland urban interface zones, or WUI. And as I mentioned earlier, the safety element is required by law that we reevaluate and update that section of the general plan. So we've been reviewing the safety concerns throughout the update process according to fire hazard, evacuation, and flood hazard. This is a slide of the evacuation zones. And it's just another example of a map that was used in anticipating which sites would be appropriate for the initial potential sites inventory that we'll be looking at today with our mapping exercise. Next slide, please. And here we have the FEMA map that shows where most of the flooding concerns are. And you can see that it's primarily in the downtown area. However, most flooding concerns can be mitigated with design elements and building code requirements. Next slide, please. So next, Ben and I will be discussing with you a summary of the potential sites. And here we have a full list of them. And moving forward, we will have these available also within our mapping exercise. And we'll share with you many ways that you can share comments, both within the mapping exercise and online at fairfaxspeaks.com. Excuse me. This is an overview of all of our potential sites that we have initiated. Now, this doesn't mean that another site can't be used. We also have opportunities within both our mapping exercise and on our website for people to suggest additional sites. This is still just the beginning, and we value and encourage the public to share with us your ideas. Next slide, please. We've got an inset map here that brings to focus a little more closely those sites that are closer in to downtown. And now Ben and I are going to briefly go through each of these sites, and we're not going to share a lot about each site, just to give everybody a flavor of it. And we have much more detail available both on the website and in the mapping exercise. Ben, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Andy. And I'd like to also reiterate this idea that what you're seeing is one picture of the back end of White Hill School, and within the Fairfax Speaks information, we have a lot of other information relating to this site. And indeed, as we go further into our planned Fairfax housing exercise today, you will start to see the information that we can bring to bear and that you can bring to bear in your recommendations to us about what's appropriate and what you desire on these sites. So White Hill School site is basically at the end of Glen Drive. We believe that it has the potential for 50 to 80 units. These could be specifically designated for Marin's 18 school district employees. I think there's 6,000 of them, many of whom are extremely housing challenged. No rezoning would be necessary for that. We know that there are some fire safety and egress concerns. It is on Glen Drive, a one-way in, one-way out zone, but it is also the site of one of the largest community refuge areas in Fairfax. This is a potential site at the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, which people may be familiar with out there in the west portion of Fairfax. Looking at Victory Village quite nearby, we believe that this site is potentially underutilized and has the potential for maybe 15 to 25 possible units. As I mentioned, Victory Village is an example of an outstanding success in providing this type of housing. It is noted that rezoning would be required. Tenalima Road, this, for people who followed prior housing efforts in town, shouldn't be surprised. This is currently listed on our current housing element. We believe that it has the potential for 22 to 30 possible units, and it is part of the town's longstanding vision for affordable housing. No rezoning would be necessary on the site. However, it is subject to floodplain regulations on a portion of it and also contains a potential historic home. St. Rita's Church. Again, we're planning for the potential future, not for a particular idea that this would become available. We don't know that, but it is the site of potentially 40 to 60 possible units. It does not take up the entire site. It's really the northern portion exclusive of the school. That portion contains about 2 flat acres. No rezoning is necessary. It is acknowledged that there is an existing and active Catholic church located, and there are some historic buildings. Westside Commercial. This is an interesting map because you will see that in the middle of the map, we already have the Fairfax Market site. It's the areas identified with the red outline. So it encompasses multiple properties. This is also sites that were previously identified in the current housing element, not the proposed one we're working on, as a potential housing site. Some of the challenges are that we need to make sure we don't displace existing commercial tenants. There are some geologic regulations to consider, and it may require rezoning. Fairfax Market site. Again, this is identified in the current housing element. This is the parking lot on the north side of the Fairfax Market. We believe it has the potential for 20 to 40 possible units. There is a property owner who is interested in using this portion of the site for housing. Concerns include making sure that the design works with existing commercial tenants, including sharing parking, and rezoning is probably necessary. School Street Plaza. This is a site with, we believe, the potential for 100 to 140 possible units. It's a location very close to the downtown and has great transit access. We also have a property owner who is interested in providing housing, and specifically affordable housing on the site. No rezoning would be necessary, but as there are existing residential and commercial tenants at this location, we need to avoid displacing those people. Morinda Heights, AKA the Wall property. And this has been a cause célèbre in town for some time. It's approximately 100 acres on steep hillside locations surrounding the Morinda and Willow neighborhoods, or up above them, I should say. It has the potential under the current zoning for 10 to 30 possible units. This is in recognition of the fact that 10 lots are possible under the current zoning, and under current state law, those parcels could also contain an ADU and a JADU. There's currently an application that has been stalled for some time for this site. It's known that any development on the site would have to undergo an environmental impact report. And so there are some significant challenges to developing the site. Deer Park Villa is a little gem in the neighborhood tucked in on Bolinas Road. We believe that has the potential for 30 to 70 housing units. It is a site with several acres that are currently open. No zoning would be required. It's understood that it is surrounded by existing residential zoning, and currently egress is one way in, one way out. The former Pancho Villa site. And you'll note that we're going from sites as large as Morinda Heights is 100 acres to something like this, which is only a fraction of an acre. However, we believe it has the potential for 10 housing units. We have had a prospective tenant in that location who came in with a proposal for that. But at that time, it wasn't really fleshed out what and how that could be accomplished. So this housing element discussion could facilitate that property owner and interested developers. Rezoning would be required for at least a portion of it, but it is noted that it fronts directly on bus sites and has walking distance to many amenities. ODonnells Nursery, basically kitty corner to the site. This is mostly level site. It shouldn't say vacant. There is, of course, a longstanding and well-appreciated nursery on that property. We believe it has the potential for 10 to 20 housing units, and a property owner who is willing to consider housing on that site. It is also well known that traffic in that area is a little bit tricky. So there would have to be a careful analysis of traffic circulation, and rezoning would be required. Eastside Commercial entails a variety of properties along the southeast end of town along Sir Francis Drake. This has been included in the prior or the current housing element. We believe it has the potential for 20 possible units. Challenges include avoiding displacement of existing tenants and addressing rezoning. The Fair Anselm Shopping Center, the location of many tenants, including Good Earth, is located at 711 on both sides, actually, of Center Boulevard. It has the potential for 50 to 90 possible units. It's a large and flat site with a pretty high visibility for developing housing. And there have been various developers who've expressed an interest in the potential development of the site. You will note that in looking at potential areas, which are shown on this slide inscribed by red, it does not include the Good Earth restaurant. Challenges include avoiding displacement of existing commercial tenants and the rezoning that would be required. The Town and Country site, a very challenging site. Looking at the aerial photo, you can see that a lot of the land area is currently undeveloped, is basically natural. This site, from a planning and development standpoint, is close to central transit services. The property owner is interested in considering development of that site. However, he's also indicated that he desires to leave a majority of the site undeveloped. We believe that there's a potential for 100 to up to 450 housing units. It's noted that the current zoning on this property came through voter initiative, and thus any future development would require rezoning with voter approval. Portions of the site are within the 100-year floodplain. There are potential historic and environmental resources, and it would need to develop a new access point. And it's also noted that in the history of the site, there have been various proposals for development that have not been successful. Jolly Hill. The reason we're including this is simply because it's a town-owned parcel that is currently not developed. However, it's not being considered as a housing site unless there is strong public support for it to be so considered. In terms of location, it's behind the Bennett House area at the bottom of Jolly Hill. Central Commercial downtown. And this includes the area where I'm standing right now at City Hall. It's what is basically described as the Central Commercial zoned area around the hub of Bolinas and Broadway and Sir Francis Drake Boulevards. You can see that in the yellow highlighted areas. It's of course right where most of our services and amenities are located, and where our current major transit stop is located. We believe that there's a potential for housing upstairs, and that it has the potential for 10 to 30 possible units. It's also noted that this is basically built up, and so it would have to be a site reuse. There is a lack of parking in this area. And in addition to addressing concerns about potential existing occupant displacement, it would require careful design to match the downtown visual styles. And I would like to add one, which will come up, although it's not part of the slide because it's all around town, is we will be discussing when we do the plan, Fairfax Housing, that there is a potential for accessory dwelling units. And in fact, we believe that those can and should be included, but we're interested in hearing what your views are on the number of accessory dwelling units that are potential in Fairfax. So when we get into this portion of today's workshop, please note that there is the ability to select housing for that type. And I guess we're now asking questions. Who's taking this next step, Andy?
I got it, Ben. I'll help facilitate this piece. So a few things just so everyone knows what we're doing next. We want to hear from you. We want to give you a chance to ask your questions, to raise your hand. We can bring you up to the virtual microphone. Tamala will help us with that. But first, I want to go through a few questions in the Q&A, just in case those answer your questions first. So if you're ready to raise your hand, you can put that up, and maybe we could kind of do a combination of strategies. The first question is about the housing. I believe it's about the housing numbers per affordability metrics, for lack of a better word. And the question is, why is there more housing for rich people than working poor? And that has been the housing inequity in Marin County, including Fairfax. That's been the situation. So Ben or Andy, do you want to talk about the distribution with housing for those different income brackets?
Well, the levels were determined by the Association of Bay Area Governments, and they have their methodology for how they determine these ratios. That's not something that we've been able to affect, not even with the appeal, right, Ben? And so as far as the ratios, those are sort of dictated to us as being requirements that we now need to meet in order to become certified with HCD, or the State Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay.
I'll also add that approximately 3/5 of the housing are designated to be affordable to either low or moderate income, very low or moderate income residents. So a majority is supposed to be affordable.
And somebody asked earlier about the ability for affordable housing to be built, and often for construction to pencil out, there does need to be some kind of ratio. So this may also end up being reflective of reality, but we'll get more into feasibility as we move forward with policy questions, because there are a number of opportunities.
Great. Here's another question, and I don't think either of you can answer it directly because it's asking about the attitude of town council toward meeting the housing goal, but thought it was worth just amplifying and hearing your guys' initial talk or take about meeting the housing goal and the likelihood, and just some of that, the consequences of not meeting it, maybe would be a better way of me phrasing that question to you right now. Was that clear? And I think this was around the time when we asked the polling question around the 490 houses, just to put it in context of when the question came up in the chat.
Well, I'll start by saying that the town council authorized the appeal of the 490 units. They share the concerns about that total number, but they also are embracing undertaking planning for future of housing in Fairfax, particularly our responsibility, both morally and legally, to affirmatively further fair housing.
Great. Here's a question about the schedule, and it said, if the housing element has a due date of January 31st, 2023, why have some cities already submitted drafts? And is there a date you are required to submit during the planning period?
So we are a part of the ABAG, or Association of Bay Area Governments region. And so our deadline is much different than those communities in, say, Southern California, I think maybe Sacramento as well. So there's rolling deadlines throughout the state. And for all 109 jurisdictions within what is understood as the Bay Area, these are all due at the end of January 2023. I hope that's helpful.
We can follow up too if we need more clarity. Here's one about water. Given our tendency for severe drought, where will the extra water come from for these additional units?
We're partnering with Marine Water to explore availability options and provision options. That this is one of the questions that obviously is directed primarily at the agency that provides water, Marin Water. But we are also aware that out of the end of this planning process, we will have to have some answers that we perhaps don't have today regarding water availability.
And that will also be part of the process for environmental review.
Great. And Ben, you touched on this as you were going through the slides, and I think this question came a little before you went through all of it, but I thought it was worth asking again, just to reiterate. And it was about, for the additional housing units, are we thinking single family or multifamily, clustered? Can you just provide some more context around, what the additional housing units would look like?
Sure. We recognize that there is a variety of housing types that would be provided to help us meet our housing goals. One of the big challenges in providing affordable housing, I think, is moving away towards this single family detached style of housing. And indeed, the state has recently changed the laws to allow duplexes on all parcels, single family residential parcels. You will see further in this discussion some of the options for provision of housing and the range of types that could be involved in Fairfax. And those are some of the questions we will have for the community as we go forward.
Great. Okay, here's the next question. Some of the proposed sites, at least some of the proposed sites, would likely call for street widening to carry more traffic and some new traffic lights. Are these aspects being planned or estimated for?
Well, to go back to the environmental review, that's part of why we're making sure we can get our sites inventory to a place where council can feel confident about going forward, where we'll then have the rest of our team work diligently on the environmental review, including transportation analysis, traffic analysis.
Yeah, and then maybe to tack onto that, Andy, there was a comment about just transit and Fairfax not having a robust transit system. So is there any additional input you want to provide to your answer when you look at it from the transit perspective?
That's a good question. Ben, I'm wondering if you can help me out with that a little bit.
Yes. Marin in general, I think emphasizes commute busing. We certainly see that in the transit routes and the headways that they provide is it's oriented towards that. There is busing available on the major arterials outside of those primary commute times, but it's not optimal. I would just emphasize that it's hard to anticipate what may be available in the future in regards to people's various mobility options. For example, automobiles now, the degree of autonomous driving and things like that. Plus, you're seeing more and more people using bicycles to commute. So part of what we're doing with providing housing in Fairfax is providing housing for people who currently have to commute in to Fairfax. So to a certain extent, if we can get local workers, and we know many of those people are currently priced out of housing in Fairfax, if we can get housing for those people, they won't necessarily be driving on the street or having to take buses, et cetera.
Great. Andy, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, just that's a very strong point and a good point, and being able to envelop and welcome daytime community members, folks who work in Fairfax, and encourage them to know that there may be additional housing opportunities in the near future. That's part of our goal.
Great. I'll combine two questions, and it's about the height limits and number of floors. So it'll be a two-part for you guys. And one piece is about the fast track with 5-story buildings, and if there are potential ideas or we need public input or discussion about that. And then the other question that I'm combining, because I think they're related, is if increasing the limits on number of floors has been considered, and that could have a big impact on the possible unit count. So it's kind of a two-parter about height limits, and then the fast track with the 5-story buildings.
Okay, I'll start by saying that nobody's proposing 5-story buildings or planning for 5-story buildings in Fairfax at this time. So I think people can probably relax a little bit about that. In terms of height limits, we do know that the state has certain provisions in their statutes that allow developers to ask for density bonuses, and that our efforts towards coming up with design standards for Fairfax would reflect that ability for developers to ask for additional height. For example, the potential for a 3-story building. Our future objective development and design standards would have a great deal to say about how that would be provided, how it would look, where they would be located. But we're kind of getting into a level of detail, I think, that would first beg the question of where are we considering putting housing? Once we have an idea of the sites, whether it's a central downtown location or further into a currently residential neighborhood, we would have a better idea of what's appropriate for that area. And again, this is where public feedback, as we get into the more details of planning for housing on certain sites, will be very helpful in guiding decision makers' recommendations and decisions.
Great. Okay, this is a good one. Can more affordable units be used toward the moderate and above moderate RHNA requirement?
That's a good question. We're going to have to come back to you on that for a firm HCD interpretation. We work closely with them and check in on occasion, and that's definitely a question that's on our list for our next opportunity to meet with them. Thank you.
Can we consider single room occupancy hotel rooms along Sir Francis Drake?
Well, we have looked at a variety of housing options that are considered affordable by design. We haven't really gotten into the details of how that housing would take place. Studios, single room occupancy, things like that. But certainly that could be part of the discussion as we go forward. So I would say we're not quite there yet.
Great. And just to orient everybody, I think we can maybe ask one more question here, and then it might be nice to open it up and to let people come up to the microphone. So Kevin, I see that your virtual hand has been raised. So maybe Tamala, you can start getting ready to elevate Kevin while we're answering this last question. And it's how many parcels of vacant land does the town own that could be used or that could be eligible for new housing?
I could answer that. The town owns several dozen pieces of land. In a preliminary analysis of those parcels, what we find is the vast majority are substantially constrained. So in terms of their potential for future housing, very limited, regardless of their current zoning designation. Not to throw it out there, but the Jolly Hill site is probably the largest potentially available site in the town right now.
Great. Okay, so I think it could be nice to hear from you. Just again, some timekeeping. Please limit your remarks to a couple minutes, 2 minutes or so. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Yeah, Kevin, looks like you're ready. You can share your screen or your video if you'd like to share your face with us. But the floor is yours, Kevin.
Oh, great, thanks. Hi, Ben. Hi, Samantha, Andy, and all. My question is regarding the Town and Country Club property. Now that it's made the sites inventory, I know it wasn't on the first, and there was some interesting wording mentioning that the owner had insisted, I think was the caption there. I don't know the story behind that, but my question would be kind of twofold here. One is, do you know if that property was ever included on any of the previous housing cycles, the 5th or 4th? And then also, if you're familiar at all with the by right decision flow chart, then section 3, if you don't know, that's fine, but maybe something down the road that you can answer. Would that ability for the by right overrule the need for a voter initiative if 20% of affordable housing was placed on that property? That's just the question. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, I think I'll wing this response. It has not been included on prior housing elements, and that in terms of legal aspects. Let me put on my lawyer hat. No, actually, that's exactly, I can't do that. So it's a very substantive question. It involves statutes and propositions and things like that. So unfortunately, I can't even begin to answer that question, but it's an interesting one and may come into play at some point.
All right, I think Pamela had her hand up next. Pamela, do you mind elevating Pamela?
Pamela, you can unmute yourself and speak now. Oh, sorry, that didn't seem to quite go right. Let's try it again. So Pamela, I can't seem to elevate you, but you can talk.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Great. So I've heard some gossip, maybe, in town that if the town creates a plan for building, etc., are we beholden to that? In other words, do we have to build if we create a plan? Can we be sued if we don't follow a plan? That's one question. The second question is about ADUs and JDUs. Has there been any kind of formal tracking or way to figure out all these illegal ones all over town to help decrease our RENA numbers? And then third, I live in the Cascades, I don't know, the last 40 years. There's no transportation up here, none. So unless you have a lot of money to pay Uber all the time, which a lot of people don't, if you want people to have affordable housing in the Cascades, no matter what it is, you've got to create transportation, because a lot of people who need affordable housing cannot afford a car. So sorry for 3 long questions, but anyway, thank you.
Well, those are some challenging questions, Pamela. I would expect no less. In terms of legal consequences, we would probably go on a site-by-site basis. I will say that if we're going to go through this exercise and identify parcels and come up with housing unit ranges, I think the hope is that we would be supportive of future housing that was consistent with what we identify in our plan. I think that's typically what the state's expectation is. So I would just say that, it's a process that we should take very seriously, and in arriving at final decisions about sites and numbers and types of development, that what we're really trying to do is avoid lawsuits, because what we're saying is this is what we support, and that a future potential developer or property owner could rely on that as a basis for going forward with development. In terms of, I think you had a question about ADUs and canvases and trying to get information about that. Was that the ADU question? Is that if that's a direction by our council to try to investigate that seriously, we would do so. It is a very significant challenge. I mean, you can imagine knocking on people's doors and asking those kind of questions. So it's a possibility. And I will also say that staff shares your concern about development in some of the more evacuation and egress challenged areas in town. And if you follow what the discussion has been so far, including at last Thursday's Planning Commission meeting, I think you will see a high awareness of some of the challenges for those type of development related issues. Certainly anything that's within the town's control is directed towards areas that have the best degree of access and potential safety in terms of fire issues.
All right, I see that Mallory has her hand raised. Tamala, do you mind elevating Mallory?
Hi, Mallory. You can click that yes box, or you are unmuted. You can go ahead and talk. What? No, actually, you're not unmuted. Can you unmute yourself on your end? There you
Yes.
go. Thank you.
Can I get I have a few questions and a comment. I think people should know the amount of what low income and means and affordable housing means, who might not know about it. And I can't get this thing off the, hold on. And then is it legal to have affordable housing for only the people who work here? Because Victoria Village had a whatever that was, where they got selected and it was for people anywhere. So are you still hearing me? Can you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And can we also bring up the idea of tiny houses? And also, I think you said, and maybe I didn't hear this correctly, why is Jolly Hill not considered? Or did I hear that wrong?
Okay, any other questions?
Nope, that's enough.
Okay, Andy, can you answer the first ones about the low income splits and
Sure, and these are numbers that we can also share on fairfaxspeaks.com. Let's see. I don't have those numbers memorized, but it's according to the average income understood for the whole of Marin County. What we can do is we can bring up a slide. Why don't you answer some of the other questions then, and I could bring up the graphic that is specific to Marin County so that I'm not talking about numbers in the air.
Okay, yes, another question was about whether it's legal to designate housing only for people who live here. This has come up quite a bit. Generally speaking, when we're dealing with affordable housing that is using deed restrictions, no, you cannot do that. I think that as a general practice, that the vast majority of people who do take advantage of that housing are local residents, as in Marin County residents. And also when we're dealing with potential housing for school employees, that would be directed towards those employees. So that's a potential. In terms of tiny houses, I think Andy has some slides further on in this workshop that point towards that as a potential. And then in terms of Jolly Hill, why it's not considered, there simply hasn't been any direction that should be considered. It functions as a park, and I believe it's considered an important part of visual open space. So we'd be curious if people are interested, and they'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that question as we get into the Plan Fairfax engagement tool today. They could register their opinions, but that's where it stands right now. And Andy, do you have that split on the affordability?
It's just taking me a minute to find where we had that story.
Yes, I am working on the background to get that shared.
Thank
It'll
you.
be a minute or two.
Okay. And I would also just point out to the listening public is that information is or will shortly be available on the Fairfax Speaks website. So you can see the specific ranges of income for each household type, whether it's single person, two people, et cetera, for the various income categories that the states assign, ranging from what they call above moderate, which is basically market rate household incomes, to very low income households. So all that information is out there, and we will have it available for you at our website.
Great. While we're waiting to get that slide up, shall we move on? Seeing head nods. All right. Tamala, looks like you were, oh, yep, perfect. Rick, the microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thanks,
There you
Sam. Okay, thank you for conducting this workshop, everyone. My first question is, has a dialogue been established with Marin Transit or any other small bus vehicle provider to have local neighborhood bus service on like a flag down bus service like they did in Northeast Marin before the pandemic? So the first question. Second question is has any method been devised for a automobile-less household, that would be a household with no automobile, to evacuate in the case of a emergency evacuation, such as the Cascades, if we put people out there with no car? And the third question is the town of Fairfax established a direct path to apply for some of these recently approved infrastructure monies, which were just approved by Congress, so that maybe we could install some type of, well, do anything which will help our situation, because we sure need it. And if we haven't, we ought to. Thank you.
Rick, I very much appreciate your questions. They're always extremely insightful and often represent kind of cutting edge questions. So in terms of dialogue, no, we have not, but it's something that we will be exploring in the transit portion of our review for the housing element. So we'll put it on our list. In terms of auto-less household evacuation, great question. And I have to say, I don't think we've looked at that yet, but we need to, because we know that there's some people who would be challenged or maybe don't have access to automobiles. Frankly, there are some worst case disaster scenarios where you're not going to be able to drive your car anyway, and we are starting to consider that. So work in progress, and stay tuned to the safety element discussions as we go forward. And then in terms of paths to apply for infrastructure money, I would say that's probably above my pay grade right now, but it seems like a good idea if the money's available. So we'll see if there's a good fit for Fairfax.
All right. I also want to point out that we have the income slide up. So any remarks, Andy or Ben, on this slide?
Maybe just to mention, the very low and extremely low are considered a single category via ABAG.
And we are aware also that when you're seeing some of these income breakouts, it reflects the fact that Marin County as a whole is one of the wealthiest counties, certainly in California. And so when you see what qualifies as low income in the various household occupancies, it's surprising how high that is. But it also isn't surprising that when you see how difficult it is to get affordable housing, what's driving some of that is these household incomes and what they're willing to pay or have to pay for housing. So we're conscious of the extreme challenges faced by many in our community who either live here or work here or would like to be either, and looking at what they can afford and how that breaks out in terms of what the state considers affordable. So there you have it.
Great. Looks like we have a few more hands raised. As a reminder, you guys can raise your hand. You can also use the chat. So thank you all for participating so far. This has been really engaging. So we appreciate hearing from you. All right, former Mayor Frank Egger, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I just got a couple of questions. On the affordable housing issue, the income to qualify should be Fairfax's average income only. What happens is when the county adds in Belvedere and Tiburon and Mill Valley and Ross, all of a sudden the incomes to qualify are huge, are large. As Mr. Berto stated, they put us in with the countywide average. Fairfax doesn't have those kinds of salaries, and what we need to do is to, if at all possible, to create a Fairfax income level and then apply that. That's number one. Number two, on this possible future housing sites, the old wall property, whether it be 99 or 100 acres, is shown as 10 market rate and then 10 ADUs. Senate Bill 9 takes effect January 1st, and it allows one house plus one ADU. Then it allows the ADU lot to be split off and another ADU added to the ADU lot and the original main lot. So we could actually end up with 40 units up there under Senate Bill 9. So maybe you could comment on that. And then my last question is, when will the environmental impact report be prepared for the new housing element? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Always appreciate your efforts, Frank. In terms of the Fairfax average income, I can just tell you that people, groups, commissions that are looking at the housing element in Fairfax are aware that the income numbers appear to be skewed, and that incorporating much higher income communities does that, and that what our goal is to try to provide meaningful, affordable housing for people in our town. In terms of future housing sites and SB 9, it is kind of interesting. The fact is that it's a one parcel right now. So going forward, that might be part of the consideration, especially insofar as it's directing the ability to split existing lots. And that might be a consideration about how we approach housing on that site, whether we really are going with those full-size parcels or some other consideration for perhaps clustering it lower down and not having that potential for split lots and additional housing scattered throughout that what's currently an undeveloped parcel. Just throwing that out there. In terms of the EIR, we haven't reached a decision on that yet. I mean, obviously there's going to be environmental review, and EMC planning is going to be bringing recommendations and their position on that to the town council, I believe in December. So that will be a question to be answered by the council, and we will move forward on that. But the decision will be made in the near future.
All right, Mallory, the microphone's yours.
Okay, I just had a thought. The Hill property, it can be for more than 10 people. I'm asking if it can be, and people in town want to buy little areas of it and build tiny houses on that wall property, and either rent them out or whatever. But I know there are people here who could afford it. I would maybe consider doing that. And if we can get enough people to do that, we could get 30 little houses or whatever the amount is to do that. So I'm just putting that out there as a suggestion. And I also want to know what is the things that are for sale in Fairfax. Do we know the prices of what people are approximately what people are selling that are talking about wanting to sell, or do we know what these things are going to be costing if they're up for sale? But I really want you to consider this. If we can get all these small houses on the Hill property, that would be so cool. And I would participate in doing that.
Mallory, I applaud your vision. It's certainly everything is in play at this point. And, low impact homes are certainly something that we definitely want to encourage through our process and in our eventual policies and programs. So I would just say, let's see. In terms of sales prices, it's a little bit challenging sometimes to get that average. The IJ used to provide it at the end of the year, and they stopped doing it. It's something that we could probably try to research. I'm sure at some level it's available, but like I said, it used to be easier, and now you have to really dig for it. So I can tell you it's higher than it used to be. Surprise, surprise.
All right, Molly. The microphone is yours, Molly.
Thank you. Hi. I'd just like to second what Mallory was talking about with the tiny houses, not having any specific place. I believe I read that San Anselmo now allows homes to put tiny houses on their property. And I'm wondering, would we be able, if we had the space, would we be able to be placing tiny homes on our property?
You know, Molly, that's kind of getting into some details that I'm not 100% sure about. I believe that it could be rolled into the site, but it would have to be put on a permanent foundation at this time. I would also observe that there's nothing that precludes somebody from putting in a very small accessory dwelling unit. And indeed, some of the people have done so or converted, for example, former garages, which are pretty much in the tiny home size range. So if that's something that the town wishes to explore, leave them as a registered vehicle, which is what a tiny home is. It's something that can travel on the highways. We would definitely check that out, especially as you mentioned, functioning more or less as an accessory dwelling unit.
All right, Michael, let's elevate you next to the microphone.
Thank you for having us today. How could we bring forth a proposal to require the town that either on a larger individual site or as collective throughout the town, that we instill a business improvement district, a BID, beforehand, so we could capture the incremental property tax difference and use that to fund our affordable housing element. Therefore, we could avoid the federal and state housing money, so we would not be on their schedule of providing us on a statewide lottery system, and offer this instead to our own local seniors, so we don't lose our seniors by putting them or raising their property taxes to basically finance the impacts of affordable housing that is offset by the state and federal money. So is there something that the town could commit to create a BID, both individually for property as well as on a collective basis, so we can protect our seniors? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I understand where you're coming from. The idea about preserving maximum local flexibility and being able to designate housing, particularly affordable housing, in ways that most benefits the town and its vulnerable populations, including seniors. It's a tough question. I'm not an expert on business improvement districts, but I believe that there are options for funding affordable housing. And I'm going to put myself on the hot seat a little bit here and briefly mention inclusionary housing. The town does not have an inclusionary housing ordinance at this time. We are moving towards developing that. And I will commit to say we will pass an inclusionary housing ordinance. So we will get some funding from that. Other funding mechanisms to support housing programs. There's some options out there, and today isn't probably the forum to really get into the details of that. But I think that it's a worthwhile objective, certainly because we know that there's just outstanding needs for housing, and that whatever we can do at our local level to meaningfully influence that and direct that, I think would be all for the good in town.
All right, I've been also keeping an eye on the Q&A, so I'll ask a few of these questions just so we hear from everybody. There's a question about multifamily units. Why not focus on multifamily units on already existing transportation corridors? Get the most results for the least amount of spatial disturbance. Ben or Andy?
Take it away, Andy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would just note that most of our sites are along the corridor in Fairfax, while recognizing it's not a booming transit corridor necessarily. There is an intention for safety reasons and for transit reasons to focus our initial sites inventory proposal along the corridor as multifamily. All of these sites are considered multifamily oriented for future construction. And I did see a question about inclusionary housing. I'm wondering if If Ben, would you like to talk a little more about that?
Yes, there's a collaborative taking place with a number of jurisdictions in the county which do not have inclusionary requirements yet. And so that is anticipated to come to fruition in the next year or two. So I think we will have inclusionary housing. Currently, you have to have some pretty strong justifications for what degree of inclusionary you require, as either as a percentage of housing developed or as an inclusionary housing fee. So it's a process and requires a fair amount of study, but it's taking place. And so we will develop that in the future. I would also add that part of the benefits of multifamily housing is that typically is where you get your affordable housing, is that you can build quite a few units on a particular parcel. And we also are aware that the design considerations for multifamily are pretty important. So, it's all tied together.
Let's break that down a little more, because I have a feeling the question asked is asking a more basic question about what inclusionary housing is. So for instance, if I were somebody who wanted to build housing in the town of Fairfax, and I came to you, Ben, at the planning department, and I had a plan for, let's say, 20 housing units, how would that inclusionary housing plan work through our discussion about what would actually need to be done? Is it a percentage like 15%? Or is it 20?
Right. Well, let's even break it down even more. When people think about inclusionary, think affordable. It's another name for affordable housing. So the idea is that not only is there a recognized societal need that when you're building market rate housing, that there's an obligation to consider housing for people who can't afford that 1% upper income echelon housing. But there's also this concept of how do you decide what to do with that affordable housing. So typically an inclusionary housing program and regulation would apply a percentage, whether it's 15% or 25% of the total housing provided, or conversely, another option, and that depends on local preferences, is they would say, well, let's just throw out a number, 25%. If 1 in 4 of the units were required to be affordable, so if it was 20, that would be 5 units. Another option potentially would be to take that money and leverage it to provide a completely affordable housing development. So there's various options out there, but that's the gist of it, is requiring people who are developing market rate housing. And we know that pretty much if you're building that type of housing, you've got a whole series of people that are going to be out there supporting that housing, whether it's house cleaners or landscapers or plumbers or whatever. And so the idea is when you bring that demand for additional services, you're responsible for providing or helping to provide for housing for those people who provide those services.
So basically, if I came to the planning department with a plan for 20 houses to be built in Fairfax, if it were a 20% rate that gets approved by council, then either four of those units would need to be affordable and deed restricted, or it would need, as a builder, I would need to contribute to a fund the amount of money equal to what it would cost for those 4 units to be built somewhere else. Is that correct?
Correct. And because Fairfax is such a small community, we wouldn't have to worry about effective redlining practices where they say, hey, I don't want to put this in my market rate development, but I'll pay you money, you can build it somewhere else. Is that pretty much if you're building housing in town and providing money or housing units in town, it's going to have a townwide benefit and won't have a disproportionate impact in any place. But it's one of those ideas whose time has come, and it's just a question of implementing a program to do so.
All right, I want to give everyone a quick time check. We were targeting starting an intermission right about now, but I'm still seeing a few questions. So I think maybe we push it a few more minutes before we take our intermission. Want to make sure that Andy and Ben are okay on the hot seat up here. First, before moving on, there's a couple questions that I think we'll still have time for, but Mallory was asking a question about tiny homes, and I think she wanted to clarify. Her question was about the tiny homes specifically on wheels, and if those will be allowed. Yeah.
I'd like to answer that with a bit of a punt, just meaning that this is a great policy consideration. And so in our next round of public engagement, we're really going to go deep with policy considerations. And I think we're hearing loud and clear, and we have in multiple meetings, how important it is to consider tiny houses. And it can potentially be a part of our solution going forward for options and opportunities for town council to consider. So it's probably not going to be a topic for discussion today, except that we will see some images that insinuate that maybe at some of these sites that we're talking about now for the sites inventory, it could be a winner. As was mentioned earlier, yeah, or suggested a particular site, maybe it would be a good location for this housing typology. So please keep us on our toes about this, and when we get in deep with policy, let's have a robust discussion and make sure that in some way or another it gets to town council as being thoroughly discussed and possibly recommended.
Okay, and Mallory, please let us know in the chat if you still have a follow-up to that. But there was another question I saw about CEQA, and if the town anticipates the CEQA analysis would identify any significant or unavoidable impacts associated with updating the housing element.
Well, that's putting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse. That the whole purpose for an environmental analysis, and whether it's what we call an initial study or an full-fledged environmental impact report, the idea is to look at the issues, study them with the appropriate experts, and then just determine if there's what they call a potential for a significant environmental impact. Now, without getting too far in front of that, I would say that with what we now know or are learning about fire impacts or some of the other constraints on housing, that there are some serious topical issues out there. So they will warrant a deep dive into the environmental assessment aspect of this housing program. So we're going to be looking carefully at that, and we're going to be soliciting input from people who are very knowledgeable about those topics.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I see Mallory wanted to clarify about tiny homes, and then Michael still had his hand up. So maybe I think we have a couple more minutes just to wrap this up, and then we can move to our intermission before our interactive exercises.
Okay, all I'm saying is it's not, somebody else brought it up, the trailers. I'm talking about real tiny homes. That's it. No trailers, just real little homes on little foundations or however they build them. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. And same answer, Andy, it would still fall under the policy updates when we get to that point in the stage of the process.
Yes, and we're hearing it from a number of people in Fairfax. So it's clear that this is worthy of debate, discussion, investigation, and but we'll be sure to do that.
Great. Okay, Michael, do you want to join us?
Absolutely, and this is also kind of a follow-up to my question beforehand, which I appreciate, Ben, your answer. Is there a restriction why we could not put the entire town in a redevelopment agency and or business improvement district so we could collectively keep these funds to build our own affordable housing? Because for the general public, people might not be as aware, when we accept the state and federal funds, some of our property tax gets a 55-year waiver, which means that the rest of our community has to pay for that impact. And we're giving that waiver to basically support a developer's profit. So if we, the town, initiated that our entire town boundary was a BID or redevelopment agency and collected and kept the incremental tax difference, we could use that for providing affordable housing and offer it to our community first without being slammed by HUD for a prejudicial move. Is there a way we can do that? Would the town be interested in doing that and doing that before we start implementing our requirements for building the first 490 units? Thank you.
You know, Michael, it's a very interesting question, especially given the increased scale of housing that we're directed to plan for. Redevelopment agencies kind of got gutted by changes in state laws and state practices. I was working for the county when their redevelopment arm pretty much went away. I'm not intimately familiar with the laws that govern redevelopment agencies or indeed business improvement districts, but it's a valid question. And I understand what you're talking about in terms of, you know, tax increment financing and things like that. So, you know, it's a good suggestion. I will have to see to what extent it's either legally viable anymore or what the requirements or challenges would be to try to provide that at the level of Fairfax's small town.
All right. Andy, Ben, how are you guys doing? Are you ready for a break?
Well, I guess it depends on the time. Also, I know we were hoping to get some, we have I see a ton of chat questions.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think part of this.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I think part of this is, once again, to put in a plug for the Fairfax Speaks website, is that we're really excited. I mean, I see we're up to 45 participants today already, and that we're getting a ton of questions. And so, you know, this is where you're going to see new content on the Fairfax Speaks site and the Q&As and things like that. So I would definitely recommend that people who are very engaged, interested in this process, to go to that site. We will be accumulating these questions, summarizing them and responding to them on that site. So if we don't respond to you individually today, you know, take heart in the fact that we will be posting those questions or summarizing and posting those and responding to those on the Fairfax Speaks site.
Please stay tuned because we're about to do our interactive exercise just after our intermission. Yeah, hold on. and if you're not already at a desktop or laptop computer, we suggest that maybe during our intermission, and Sam will talk a little more about that, but we definitely want you to be prepared and ready for this interactive exercise. We're excited to bring it to you and to help you learn about it and become ambassadors, and more on that soon. And
we think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so just to summarize, we'll take about a 12-minute, it says 10 minutes, but we'll take about a 12-minute intermission. You can, you know, pause, mute, go take care of whatever you need to take care of. We'll meet back here around 4. And Mark, I just want to acknowledge that we know your hand is up. There's going to be more opportunities to hear from you. And so you are top on our list when we come back and open up the discussion. So appreciate your patience. And thank you all for engaging so far. This has been a really robust discussion. So I am really honored and happy with the engagement so far. So with that, I guess we can all mute ourselves and pause, and we will meet back here at 4 o'clock.
Thank you. This is the break in the meeting. You're welcome to just mute yourself and stay on. If you do need to leave, you can simply re-enter with the same URL. Thank you very much, and we will be taking a 10-minute intermission. Hello, everyone, and thank you. We are closing our intermission. So if you are pouring yourself a glass water or quieting the dog, please do finish your task and come on back to the computer. We are closing our intermission. Thank you, everyone, for attending our housing element update workshop.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to start with our interactive tool next. And just before we launch the interactive tool, we want to be proactive with sharing a few images of different types of housing options that help with visualization for the future built environment. So here's some tiny homes or eco-village ideas. These, of course, aren't super tiny, but Mallory will be sure to include more graphics specific to ideas that you might have in mind as we move forward with policy discussions. And next slide, please. Missing middle opportunities. And so this allows for sometimes duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhomes, opportunities for folks who maybe wouldn't be able to afford a full single family home, opportunities for multi-generational housing. Next slide, please. And we've also talked a little bit about ADUs. Carriage house is another opportunity for that. If you have a garage and maybe you want to make sure that you can retain parking, particularly for some of the sites here in Fairfax, maybe rebuilding a garage with a unit on top is an option. ADUs generally throughout the community might be a good option. And sometimes a concept of a tiny home, as Ben was mentioning, fit well into the description and definition for an accessory dwelling unit. Next slide, please. And then, of course, Main Street buildings. And all of these sites are images of sites here in Marin communities. Of course, there are some housing units in downtown Fairfax now. As Ben mentioned, there's not a suggestion to go higher than 2 stories. Is that correct, Ben, in the downtown area as we launch into our interactive tool next? Okay, here we go. Just a couple of points on the interactive tool before we start. So what is the Plan Fairfax Housing Tool? We're not going to be using the term balancing act, though that is the software that we are using. So if you've heard us use that term in the past, they are the developers of the site as far as the software. But as you met Rachel earlier today, she's really our developer specific to Fairfax. I want to be clear that this is in beta. So as we progress and we may have iterative maps into the future, they will become more and more catered to what we want to be able to use here in Fairfax. So today's exercise, where our intention is to help you become an ambassador for this tool, so that you can use this tool as a visual preference for distribution of housing sites throughout Fairfax. So we'd like you to balance which sites you see that the town of Fairfax is considering, choose which sites you'd like to see future housing built, and select how many units you'd like to see for each potential housing site. So this tool will be available through December 4th. So we've got plenty of time for you to be more contemplative when you try this tool out again after our workshop today. So our next slide is about optional support. And we're going to come back to this slide once I launch the site and show you around a little bit. And once I show you a few of the tools, then Rachel will be sharing the URL in the chat. So Sam, I think I'm ready to share my screen. Thank you. Okay. See, I can't. Okay, so you can see at the top here, it says Plan Fairfax Housing. That's the name of our site. And here you can see a thermometer. And it says negative 490 housing units. That's the number of housing units that the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, has allocated through their Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, specific to Fairfax. So what we have here is a map that includes each of those sites that we just, that Ben just led you through to help you understand the opportunities and challenges for each of the sites. And we've got a couple of columns. Now, as I mentioned, this is in beta. So there are a few things in here that we know we'd like to maybe design out of it because it may be confusing, and other things that are very interactive and we're super excited to share with you. So we'll give you our quick description of each of those things. Now you can select a shape on a map. For instance, we know this is Town and Country site and it's site number 14. Before I do that, I do want to bring your attention to this. There's an opportunity here for options throughout town. And it can be easy to miss once you get going with all of the sites list. So for this option throughout town, it is the accessory dwelling units across town. And we have, when we hit the plus sign, then it adds a certain number of housing units. This one is not associated with the map because we can't determine exactly where those accessory dwelling units might be located over time. So now I'll show you how, if we were to go to, say, the Town and Country site, for instance, just because it's right in front of me, and here it is, number 14. Again, you can plus and minus. The other thing you can do, and that's one of the quirks that we would like to have designed out of here. We're working closely with the developers over at Balancing Act, and they're super great to work with. This tool was originally developed to help people balance budgets and to share that in this direct democracy sort of way to allow the public to share their own preferences. So I want to encourage you to use this button, which is the reset, if there's ever, if you add and then maybe you decide you wanted fewer and you see this prompt come up that says minimum amount reach, you can close that. You can then reset and you can add again. We also have an area here where you can comment. So if you'd like to make a comment about a particular site, that's where you would do that. And as Ben mentioned earlier today, when he was presenting the Jolly Hill site, because this is a site that is not under consideration except for comment, then we have our more information tool, which is true for all of the sites that we have listed right now. And then we have this little add a comment. So you can add a comment if you have an opinion about Jolly Hill and whether or not it should be on the on this sites inventory analysis. Now, the other opportunity we have, similar to Jolly Hill, is this opportunity, enter your own via comment. So I saw a comment within the question and answer opportunity on our Zoom. And somebody asked about some particular multifamily buildings and why they're not included. This is a perfect opportunity to now share with us specifically those addresses if you can, but if all you have is the description of the area as I read it in the comment, that would certainly help us move forward, and we might ask you to reach out to us if you want to share more information about that. So some other notes about the functionality is, let's look at the full sites list, is this globe. So if I begin to add sites, or excuse me, housing units at this particular site, but then I want to look again at the map, if I hit globe, it takes me specifically to that site. I can then, I can scroll out if I use control and scroll. And you can see here that it did change to a slightly darker green color than the other sites. And that's because I've suggested to add housing to that particular site. So I can set that back to 0 if I wanted to. I can go into the more details. And within the more details, it includes, excuse me, some of the sites, it does not include an interactive map. And I think that this one did. I'm hoping that everybody could see where that brought me to. If I now click on view map, it takes me to this location. And as Ben mentioned, and I'm glad that I brought up this site in particular, because as Ben mentioned, it is only the back side of this area of this lot where the school currently exists. There is no suggestion that anything would happen with the school itself. I'll take you back to the site now. And it took a second here to load up that particular graphic, but I'm hoping that you can see it now. So what this thermometer does is it gauges how many numbers of units, the total number of units that you're suggesting to add with your own housing plan. So for instance, if I know that I want to include accessory dwelling units, and we do have all of these maxed out at a certain number, and that just has to do with limitations on feasibility as we understand it. But again, this is an opportunity to add a comment. If you think that there's anything that we are wrong about in our assumptions, we certainly want to hear from you. But you can see here the number has changed. It's now -290 rather than 450. I could then add at the Fairfax Market. I could add at School Street. I could decide to just add a few here and there, or I could, or you could certainly, choose to max out on a couple of sites. There's numerous ways that you can interact with this tool that will be informative to us in a way that we can understand your visual preference for distribution of housing in Fairfax. And your preference for which sites could and maybe should not be considered. And we'd love to hear why you might think that. And we're watching the number right now become closer and closer to 0, which would mean that we would be meeting the goal set by ABAG for the town of Fairfax. Okay, again, that was for a particular site that I reached a maximum for. If I add a few more, and now it says you have a housing plan. At that point, you can then hit submit. Rachel, please correct me. I don't think they need to submit for each category. Is that right?
They actually do need to click submit category for each category.
For each one. Okay.
Yep.
So this is one piece in this beta tool that we would rather see go away. And again, they're very good at working with us, so it may by the time we work with you with the next map. So this is a column where in the future we may talk about things like buffer, and we're not going to get into the details of that today, but the idea is that there may be sort of a multiple choice drop down within this column. And for now, we just ask that you submit category as is, just a recognition that the 490 units is what is required. And then you can submit the whole thing. You let us know that you're not a robot. And it's possible before you submit, if you want to be able to track what your choices were, a screenshot is really the only way to do it right now. So we want to make it clear that please don't anticipate getting sort of a receipt of what your choices were. That's just not part of the functionality at this point in time. But you might like to keep that for your own records to remind yourself of what your choices were.
So Andy, I'll jump in here. I think I wanted to share a few comments that came to my mind. We know that this tool, there's a lot of information that we're trying to capture in this tool, and it can be really complicated. And so we want to have time and space to walk you through it today. That's what we're doing here. But we also understand and respect that it might take you more time to fill it out. So after looking at the tool, I just wanted to put up this slide again about why are we using this? Oh, and I just realized my video is off. I'm sorry, guys. I just wanted to share again, why we're using this tool. That it's a way for you to select the site. So as Andy was clicking up and down, that's the main purpose that we're trying to take away. And we know it's not perfect, it's still a work in progress, but we appreciate you here to help engage and identify where these sites want to go. And again, it will be available from now through December 4th. Andy, is it time to release the URL?
It looks like Rachel has already released that. Oh no, that's all. Oh, here it is. There it is.
All right,
okay.
So
I do want. Yeah,
Oh.
I do want to point out real quickly that what Rachel did release prior to this is the specific site for all of the inventory sites on our fairfaxspeaks.com.
Yes, exactly, because we understand that there's a lot of information for each site, so we wanted to provide you that information so you can fill this out thoughtfully. So that first link with the site's inventory, that's where you can find more information about each site. And then Rachel released the Town of Fairfax balancingact.com URL. I'm struggling with that acronym today. So now I believe we have 20 minutes or so that we want you to try the tool. Will be available for the Q&A and the chat. Andy, what else do we need to let them know before we let them play around with the tool themselves?
Well, if we're seeing anything in the Q&A where a lot of people are having, sort of similar questions, I'm more than happy to pop open my map again and do a demonstration in order to answer any questions about how to use the site. So when you go to the URL, yeah, you can do just what I showed you. And then after, so we're going to give you 20 minutes, as Sam mentioned. And then once you're done, you can stick around to learn about next steps and join more Q&A. And you can also receive support for anyone who needs help with the tool, both now and later on in the process.
Andy, I also wonder if now is a good time to bring Mark up to the stage because we didn't get to answer his question before intermission. So everyone might be settling into the link and clicking. So Mark, if you're there and you still have a question and would like to join us, I think now could be a good time to bring you into the discussion. And Want to point out that Rachel's in the chat to support anyone with accessing the balancing act. So
Okay,
The
but
only- I
you
don't
can
want to
hear
take
me.
away from his opportunity to work on the map, though. That's the only thing.
yeah, we
You
will
can
give
hear
him
me, am
plenty
I
of time.
correct?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, my question is, and you may have covered this earlier, besides the fact that the information or the data that's being shown that's telling us or forcing us supposedly to increase the number of housing is obsolete, latest data shows that people are leaving the state of California, even to the point of where we've lost a House of Representative member because of the decreasing population. So that's one question that maybe you covered, but I didn't hear. And this is data, this has been passed on to me by someone who works in the cutting edge technology in this field. Secondly, this is all very nice and cute, but the reality is that we have no way to get out of town if there's a fire. Now, we're in a WUI zone, supposedly that has nothing to do with anything. So I don't recall there ever being a contract between the people of a country and a government, which allows that government to basically sentence them all to death, because that's what's going to happen here if you add this amount of housing. So why aren't we fighting this? Because it doesn't make any common sense whatsoever. Then you factor in the water situation, et cetera. More common sense tells you that this whole housing element update is absurd. And then you get to the point of, well, maybe people in the legislature have passed these laws and it's being filtered down through all these various, whatever you call them, ABAG or associations or whatever, but it's never been challenged in a court of law. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's constitutional. And I find it really hard to believe that as constitutional court in the state of California, let alone the United States, even with its current makeup, will say that the state has the right to condemn people to death. So maybe you covered this in the part that I missed, and I'll be happy to listen to your answers.
Well, Andy, I think we could respond to the last point first about the legal challenges. Mark, as a matter of fact, jurisdictions who feel they're in a similar situation have pursued legal challenges. And Andy, what were the two jurisdictions down in Southern California?
Coronado and Huntington Beach.
Right. So Mark, maybe read the result of that. I can tell you that it ended up being a legal agreement where they pretty much did what the state demanded that they do. In terms of your concerns about safety, I share that concern. Planning commissioners, town council members share that concern. And you were part of the planning commission meeting. You know that in looking at the safety element, the vast array of resources being pointed at trying to improve people's safety, especially with respect to fire. No, we don't have all the answers in terms of evacuation, but we're learning. We're identifying the one way in, one way out streets. You will see coming up in the town council meeting in December, an urgency ordinance that's responding to Senate Bill 9 about the duplex development on single family lots. So I would say that the town is acting in a responsible manner and is taking steps that it believes lie within its purview. And I think the ultimate answer is legislative and who you elect to represent you and what those people vote for or don't vote for. In terms of further on evacuation, as I said, there's a lot of information being developed now, and there are evacuation analyses being conducted. So when we get the results of that, I think it will really help us decide what our best choices are. But I can tell you that there are choices out there to improve safety. And a lot of those choices have to do with what people who live in Fairfax do. And I'll just give you a quick example is cleaning gutters. That what they now know from doing a lot of extensive research into wildland fires in California and other states is that the way houses burn and ignite isn't from a wall of flame, it's from ember fall. And what happens is the embers fall just where all the leaves and pine needles and detritus land on your roof. So first the fire starter lands in your gutters, and then the embers ignite it, and there goes your house. So those are examples of things where, with that knowledge, with knowing how deadly serious that is, it would inspire people, hopefully, to take cleaning their gutters out seriously. For future housing, there are designs that can minimize the impact of fire. I mean, for sure, we're long past the days of shingle-sided houses or roofs that were made out of combustible materials. So these are all steps where new housing is already safer. And with the continued development of knowledge, the now houses that come on board in the future will be even safer yet. So evacuation, really tough question. We're looking at it. We will be providing information about what we believe the best options are for this community. But no, it's not a death sentence. And, at the end of the day, something that because I know you follow council meetings closely and presentations, is one of the things that our fire officials say is, look, we know when the really serious fire concerns are, it's red flag days. And if people really want to preserve their safety, one of the options to consider is pre-evacuating. So yeah, when that wall of flame is rushing down on you, it's a little late in the game. And that's going to put a lot of people in a tough situation. But again, there's ways to avoid that. So thanks for your question. And like I said, keep us on our toes. We will be continuing to investigate this and come up with some suggestions and options for the community.
Then just in, we have now 5 simulations. Oh, 6. We have 6 submitted. Thank you, everybody. This is super exciting. Should we give maybe another 5 minutes so folks can finish up? And if anybody's having any questions or hardship, please.
Yeah, I'm surveying the chat and the questions, and I have a few prompts to throw at you and Andy and Ben. There's one question or one comment from Rick saying that he cannot reach 490, but if his unit by comment were to count, he could. So he was asking if that will be enabled soon. So I thought that was a good detail to discuss as a group. You want to take that, Andy?
I want to understand a little bit better. My guess is that what it means is that you have ideas about sites that aren't included, and the numbers of units you would anticipate with those sites could help you reach to 490. If we could hear back from you to know if those assumptions are correct.
And I would also say, if this is Rick Hamer asking that question, that he has a platform to discuss that. And something else, my email address, bberto@townoffairfax.org. Shoot me an email. If you've got ideas, things that have just occurred to you, even though we've tried to be as inclusive as possible with what we call our housing opportunity sites, I'm sure there's a couple of options out there that we haven't considered or haven't gotten on this list. Certainly, for example, we came up with our central commercial housing options from a council member at a recent town council meeting. So there are options out there. So if you've got ideas, let us know and we'll be happy to follow up with that.
Yeah, so Rick does have his hand up, so I was thinking maybe we can let him step to the microphone to respond to your question, Andy. And I wanted to amplify that too, because we've discussed about having iterations of this exercise. So I think that could be a good segue to explain that detail.
Well, thank you. Yes, and one very important thing is that we'll also have this available in Spanish in the very near future. So so that'll be an exciting thing. And Sam, what would you like me to talk about?
Oh, I was suggesting and seeing if maybe Tamala wanted to give the microphone to Rick so he could clarify the what he was wanting to get at with the 490 and the specifics of his comment, so we can make sure we answer that and provide that information for everybody.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Hi, Sam. I think I'm unmuted now.
We can hear you.
Great. There's a few sites I just can't add in good conscience to on your list. And there's enough of those that because the ceiling number on some sites that I would add more to, I reached the maximum. Okay, so what I would do is I would say through comment, how about this, right? Or something like that, which would have given me, you know, I'll just point out I'm minus 140, so I'm quite a ways from coming up with a housing plan. And that's because some sites which I think can accommodate more units can't, and then other sites that, for example, I completely had to go wild on School Street to even get that number, right? Which is about twice as many as I would have allocated personally, and I do know about School Street. So anyway, yeah, that's why I was hoping if that one line where it says submit, so submit by comment, if those could actually be added to the tally, then I could submit, but I can't submit until that is enabled.
And that's because you would like to submit beyond the maximum that we have it as now for a few of the sites. Is that right?
Right. I just can't even give you my opinion because it won't let me submit. And I do have an opinion. It's just that it's either above your ceiling for a site, or it comprises of a new site which you don't have on your list, or some other variation of it.
Great. It sounds like we need to be more expansive in a couple different directions with our next.
And this is something else I think in the lead up to the workshop, Andy, we were discussing that for people who have comments about what we've informally referred to as sacred sites, something that's on our list that I think Ricky said do not believe is appropriate. If you go to the Fairfax Speaks site, for those individual sites, and I don't want to misstate, I'll let an expert provide the details, but there's a comment section for every site. And so that's where I would encourage you, if there are additional units available on one site or other sites that you say this should not be developed at all, is go to Fairfax Speaks, go to that site and register that opinion. And I would invite anybody to do that because we want to hear about that too. We understand there's some limitations of the tool. We took our best guesstimates on ranges, and yes, this 490 is a hard taskmaster, because that's the same challenge we're facing, is getting to that 490 with our looking at different sites and different housing options. So, but the Fairfax Speaks will, I think, provide you with the ability to register your opinion. And that includes anybody who's watching this right now, is that you have additional opportunities to express your opinions besides just doing this tool today.
All right, we're getting a few more questions and comments. So unless I hear otherwise, Andy and Ben, I can keep surveying some of these. There was a comment about underground parking lots and ground floor parking lots, and just wanted to know if that's a plan or, you know, likely to be considered as part of these sites when they develop.
One of the things we want to be sure of as we move forward with our plan is that it's something that's grounded in feasibility, and in order for a site to feasibly enable underground parking, it has to meet certain metrics. And so far, the guidance that we've received from experts on our team, it's not likely that a housing project would pencil with underground parking in Fairfax. Although, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just interject that I know that the conceptual plans that we saw regarding the Pancho Villa site, I believe was largely ground floor parking. So they were proposing parking on that site with residential up above. So, there's options out there, and we certainly welcome input as we go through this process from the people who own the sites and their architects to give us some idea of what they're considering. But yeah, there's a number of different options. As Andy pointed out, though, it's pretty darned expensive to dig underground.
But these are great policy questions going forward as well.
Yes, they are. Andy, would you like me to stop sharing my screen so you can take over the sharing?
I'd love to. Thank you.
Perfect. And while you're doing that, I also wanted to point out that there was a suggestion that I really liked and I wanted to amplify here about the possibility of taking a walking tour as a group. And so I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I just wanted to throw that out as a really great idea and suggestion that we got from the group today.
Yeah, I think that should be in play. Maybe take the time to explore sites. I mean, there's a couple sites that, one site that I haven't been on, and that's just out of respect for the fact that when you're on private property, you generally don't go there unless you're invited. But in terms of the range of opportunity sites and trying to get people even more familiar, I mean, we respect the heck out of people who are long-term residents and their intimate knowledge of this community. But to the extent that we can help clarify what's potential, what we think our potential is, and have that discussion, great.
All right, so we're seeing your screen now, Andy, with the Fairfax Speaks website.
Yes, so I wanted to bring everybody's attention to this new portal. So when you click on this, it brings you to a page that shows all of the site inventory information that we discussed today, sites 1 through 16. And it also has a close-up map just to help to see the sites that are closer in with one another. And then we have this sites list. For each site, there's an opportunity to submit feedback. And it starts with just an emoji reaction and then asks you to tell us a little bit more about why you have that reaction. And you can then submit it, and that all will be collected and shared through our process of putting together our housing element update. And you can see here too, there's also opportunities to share it in several different social media options.
So that's another point I'd like to make too, is that there's an opportunity for participants today to leverage your participation among your group of friends, and we heartily encourage you to do that. We live in a social world, and in some cases a virtual world such as today. So please, your involvement will only improve our process. And so to the extent that you expand awareness of what we're doing here, it will only help us. So thank you.
I'm still scanning the Q&A just to make sure we're answering questions while people are still playing around with the tool. There's a question about how many units can be for sale versus rental properties.
I don't think there's a distinction between that. That some types of housing, for example, an accessory dwelling unit, is pretty much going to be a rental unit, just because by virtue of the fact that it shares the site with the primary unit. So one of them is going to be rented out. But beyond that, multifamily, if you're going to develop it for sale, i.e. condo type or townhouse, that's going to be a different design from the get-go. So you would sort of know going in what somebody's proposing. They would develop as that type of housing if their intention was to rent.
Perfect. Andy, anything you want to add to that?
Well, just that, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much on what SB 9 can and does and won't and all of that, but just basically though, the idea of if you wanted to build something that's always been understood as an ADU or accessory dwelling unit, there is now the opportunity through SB 9 to have that be an item for purchase as well. It would be sort of condo ownership on a single family parcel, essentially. But just to make it clear that there's all kinds of opportunities going forward for homeownership, for that can also be for multi-generational opportunities for that kind of investment.
All right. Here's another question about what criteria the commission and council will use to evaluate the exact number of units, their size, height, etc.
Well, it's more than just council. It will be the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So we are aligning our methodology and our analysis with what is required by them for meeting the numbers on a per site basis. So it will be according to our analysis, which sites we believe would possibly have more affordable housing than other sites, and throughout this 8-year cycle, that's something that HCD will be watching closely. And if a site gets developed with less than the amount of affordable units that we have anticipated for a site, then there is a requirement to then reevaluate the whole of the plan if you're not able to show that it's available to be built elsewhere in the community. And that gets a little in the weeds. We're starting to talk about buffer, so I'll back off.
Yeah, I would add that some of those selection criteria are fairly straightforward. As we've reported throughout this process, in looking at safety related aspects and evacuation, we've got that map that shows the one way in, one way out street, especially the narrower, windier roads. And when we were looking at what they refer to as missing middle housing, duplexes, quadplexes, things like that, we were certainly most interested in applying those in neighborhoods that did not have constrained evacuation. And I think you'll see that reflected in our SB 9 regulations set to go to the council on December 1st. Other discussions that we've had, including specifically with the planning commission members, have to do with a good scale fit with existing neighborhoods, with the idea being as you get further away from the downtown and our primary arterials, that's where the scale of those houses should go down, and vice versa, that where you have sites that front directly on Sir Francis Drake or are in the downtown or near the downtown area, you look at the scale and architectural styles of those buildings and how they front directly on, in many cases, directly on the street. You could probably make a reasonable assumption that new housing would mimic that style. That would seem to be appropriate. So, some of that is just looking around at the town and saying, okay, looking at our housing sites, what's nearby, where's it located, things like that. I'll tell you, some of this is, what do you think? I mean, we have our own ideas, but this is part of what we're doing with this Plan Fairfax housing is people, especially people who've lived here for a while, but even if you haven't, is we're throwing out some numbers, and you go out to that site and kind of envision what that would look like, and you tell us, because at the end of the day, preference ranking or preference surveys can definitely influence decision makers, and we will be looking at all of this input very carefully. So help us to help you.
I like it. So I don't know. I don't want to rush anybody. I think we still have some time. But Andy, would now be a good time just to talk about next steps?
Happy to. Yes, it sounds like we have 12 submitted already. It's pretty exciting. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us in this beta environment and trying new things. Our next steps will be to have our mapping exercise available for the next 2 weeks. So after December 4th, we'll collate all submitted plans, and then we'll also include any updates on that same sites inventory page that we looked at, and a draft sites inventory report will be available, and that will incorporate comments and questions that we're receiving today and in the next couple of weeks. And we're going to do more outreach, particularly with those who live in multifamily. And we also have a focus group that we're working with now, employees at Ben, remind me.
Good Earth.
Good Earth. Yes, thank you. And the town council meeting, as Ben mentioned, on December 15th, we'll be discussing both the safety element draft and the sites inventory draft. So here we come back to this question, and I think Tamala will offer this poll once again. We'd love to hear back from you.
And we do have a question we had earlier, but we're asking you again. At this time, how confident do you feel about the knowledge of the housing element update process? Are you confident, somewhat confident, or unsure? Thank you. I see we have about 40% who have participated. If you're still on the call, and you can find the poll box. How confident do you feel about the knowledge of the housing element update process? Okay, and we will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Well, we do seem to have made some progress today. We now have 33% that are confident and 67% that are somewhat confident. That is a pretty good contrast to before, where we actually had 35% who are confident, and we had 38% who were somewhat confident, and we had 27% who were unsure. So it seems we've moved those unsure people into somewhat confidence.
Thank you, Tamala.
So I think we're getting toward the end, and I'm just, again, keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A. And it seems to get to a point where, people seem to just naturally be wrapping up. I don't think we want to rush anybody, and we still have another hour that we scheduled. So we're here to talk and engage, but at this point, maybe we talk about the last, remaining aspects to participate, and then we can still be around and answer some more Q&As. But Andy, anything else to add about ongoing participation?
We just look forward to receiving more comments, and we hope that everyone who participated today will consider themselves ambassadors for this tool and the website, and for the effort in general, and that you'll share with your neighbors and your friends and the community at large, and keep coming back. Please know that we will be sending out emails to give you updates on what's happening with the website and what new information we might have available for you to comment on and ask questions of. and we're hoping to have some iterative maps. So that would mean that if you're registered on our website, then that's a guarantee that we'll be able to get out an email to you to alert you about any new mapping exercises going forward. And then, of course, in the new year, we'll be talking a lot more about policy. I heard a lot of great policy ideas and suggestions today that we'll be sure to fold in, and we'll look forward to your engagement as we move through the process here in pretty rapid order. This is a tight timeline. We have 11 new rules, laws on the books just for site inventory, compared with the 5th cycle housing element. We're now on the 6th update. And there's numerous other laws that we're also paying heed to. So there's a lot of newness, and we're trying a lot of new opportunities to reach out to you. So please, we'd love your feedback on any of that, the way that we're communicating, the things that we're communicating. And we can't emphasize enough that this is your general plan, this is your community, and we're just trying to be good stewards in helping you to get across that finish line with HCD, with a certified housing element. And we can't do it without you. So thanks for joining us today. And I know Ben has some words also. And like Sam mentioned, we're available for question and answer afterwards.
And I do want to add one thing that I saw. There was a comment about it'd be nice to see everyone's chat comments. So we will be collating everything we hear and sharing that back to the community. So I wanted to make sure that that we connected that loop there. As will the recording of the workshop will be available too. So if your neighbors, your friends weren't available to attend, they can participate asynchronously. That's the benefit of doing something virtually like this. So with that, I think Ben.
Yeah. First of all, yes, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday and participating in this workshop. We realize there's many things that everybody does, and the fact that you have prioritized this is something that we and I deeply appreciate. So thank you once again. In terms of, that last survey was, I thought, very helpful, because what it said is a lot of people who showed up initially didn't really know much about the housing process. And by the end of this workshop, I think you feel quite a bit more informed. And that was, of course, one of our primary goals, was to share what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And that's another aspect is now that you've gone through this process, as Andy mentioned, we consider you ambassadors and force multipliers. And so regardless of your opinion about what we're doing, the number of units, et cetera, we're counting on you to talk to your friends, your social circle, people online, et cetera, and say, hey, look, they're asking for your input. I mean, it's easy to sit back and just complain or jump in at the end, but it's like roll up your sleeves, get involved with this process. I think we've got a pretty good tool to use to give us your preferences. We heard today somebody was saying, hey, I've got a couple sites that I don't think should be developed. So, on the Fairfax Speak site, you can let us know about that. And I think that's important information in our process. And let's see what else. Yeah, so just in terms of general improving our housing element update process, your participation, your ongoing involvement, we're going to be working on this till the end of 2022. So please stay involved and register on the site, or just visit the site and see what's going on. I mean, if you register, though, you get those automatic updates. So it's very easy for you just to open up an email or go, ooh, they've added something, or this is what's new. Go there, spend 5 minutes, see what's involved. And that way, when we hear from you, whether at Planning Commission or the Affordable Housing Committee, one of the other Fairfax groups, or finally the Town Council, including next week, you will have knowledge to be a more effective proponent of whatever your point of view is. So I think it's a win-win situation from our standpoint. And finally, We're still early in this process, and wherever you come from, whether you've pretty much started from scratch today or have been following and participating in this process, we want to emphasize that whatever and whenever you feel like participating, we welcome it. So the main thing is just check in, let us know what's going on, because at the end of the day, it's your community. And if we reflect what you want to see, it'll be a better community for it. So with that, I would finally just put that final plug for the Fairfax Speaks site. It's the world we live in right now. We're not meeting in person yet. I hope and I anticipate that we will have in-person meetings before the end of this process. But right now, we're just trying to get information as best we can, two ways, to get it out to you and to get it from you. And right now, I think we've got a pretty good tool for establishing your preferences and your friends' preferences. So let's get that participation rate up and let us know and our decision makers know. And with that, I think as Sam pointed out, we're happy to stick around if you have further comments. This is recorded, it will be posted. So for people that in fact, I know two people that would have definitely been online if they weren't otherwise engaged. That there's an opportunity for everybody to walk through this, and you don't have to do 4 hours at a bite. You can simply watch whatever part, put a bookmark there and then come back to it. Take that survey on the site once you feel like you're really up to speed on what's involved. So anytime it works for you, it works for us. And let's see, I think somebody's going to mention our exit survey.
Tamala, do you want to give an overview with the exit survey? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, I actually can't see the exit survey until I exit. But yes, there is a quick exit survey. Please do take it. It's very important. It tells us how we did on the webinar today, and we need that information. So please fill out your exit survey, and we will see the results after that.
Perfect.
Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you. And I do see that we have a hand raised in the audience. So in the spirit of taking comments and questions, want to give Wendy the microphone to. All right, I see some thumbs up from Andy.
Oh, great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to see if you guys could specifically address, like, if there's going to be senior housing units or how that might happen.
I think that's an excellent policy discussion. I know that Victory Village was a success in the town of Fairfax, and we have recognized through our demographic study that there is an aging population here in Fairfax, quite significant, and so it would make sense to address the needs of older adults group, and so please continue joining our conversations, because we can investigate and see what we might be able to do with policy at these locations. So if you could help us think about locations that would be dynamic and appropriate for older adults, then that would be a great first step.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that too, is that we have met with Age Friendly Fairfax. We consider them partners in our efforts, both to do outreach and also gain knowledge about what their specific concerns are. And we would like to welcome housing for seniors as part of our housing programs going forward. We know that there are some real serious challenges with people in their current housing, and we'd like to put together substantive programs to start to address that. So, whether it's future meetings with Age Friendly, and I think we're going to be getting together with a group of those people in the near future, or just as we start to flesh out our policies and programs. Please let us know your input and your knowledge, because I know there's a ton of information out there and people who are concerned. And as Andy mentioned, I think Fairfax is the most rapidly aging community in Marin, which is saying something too, because Marin is not exactly a bunch of spring chickens. So we know that we've got a group of people out there that have needs, and we want to do our best to try to help meet those.
All right, it looks like we have another hand raised. Pamela, the mic is yours.
Hi, Pamela Meggs here again, former planning commissioner. I'm just thinking, you know, I think to promote I'm stuck on ADUs and JDUs because I really think there's many of them here and they're just not known. I think there's a lot of fear by a lot of people of penalties of, oh my God, and all that. And I don't think it's as bad as it used to be because a lot of these penalties or there's amnesty periods, et cetera. But I'm hoping that you guys could do a workshop telling people what's needed, what's not needed, the laws and all of that, so it can alleviate their fears and come forward. It's just, I know what's going on in my neighborhood. I've got 2 or 3 people here and I can tell by the cars and the noise level. So is that possible to think about that? I mean, to me, that would be something that could possibly help these people come forward. Thank you.
We recognize ADUs as one of those best fit options in our communities. And this isn't just Fairfax, but you know, when you think of the scale and the fact that where people are living on the same parcel with the landlord, that generally there's pretty careful selection process. So, you know, that those renters tend to be, you know, good fits also. So yeah, Pamela, I really thank you for that. In terms of demystifying and getting information out, I can say that we process a lot more accessory dwelling unit applications here in planning and building than we used to, and that we have a track record of doing that. And the word I would send out is, you know, have a chat with us, find out, you know, what your particular circumstances are if you've got one of these that you haven't gotten it legalized, because I think you'll find that by and large, it's a very welcoming process, and there aren't a lot of hidden gotchas. I mean, so, you know, yeah, come on in. And in terms of workshops and things like that, I agree, that's a good idea. You know, again, Fairfax is working with the county to get some information out there. I was even thinking it would be great to have kind of a one-stop shop process where we had somebody who was an expert and just spoke to people who are interested in it or maybe legalizing it and could just walk them from start to finish what the process entails and give them an idea. But there's more information all the time. And I think, you know, given, gosh, we've probably approved close to 100. I'm probably overstating it. If Linda's still listening, she's rolling her eyes, but I know we're approving more than 10 a year, which is about 9 more than we approved before the new state laws. So it's picking up, and we'll be looking at options for continuing to spread the word about that.
All right, I see that Wendy's hand is raised.
Oh, great, thanks. I wanted to respond, but I got muted again before I was able to. I wanted to say, Andre and Brent, thank you so much. I'm one of the commissioners for District 2 for the Commission on Aging, and I was at that meeting with Jody Timms and you guys months ago now. And I really appreciate the way that you're, you know, taking all these steps and having all these meetings. It's part of the process, but it really seems like you guys are doing a good job. I obviously am going to be advocating for senior housing, especially low-income seniors. But I was wondering, where is the process for the policy steps that you were talking about? When does that part happen?
That part happens in the new year. It's after we're certain about what path to go forward with our environmental review, whether it's an ISMND or an EIR, and that just
jargon, Andy.
What's
initial
that?
study mitigated.
Yeah, what?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
It's getting
yes.
late, so we slept.
Yeah, so it's really whether it's a light touch or a very deep analysis. We still look at all the same things. It's just how deep we go, and there's just a difference in effort and documentation between the IS and the initial study and the environmental impact report. So so we need to make sure our team has enough time to get that started. So we'll be talking about policy, I would say January, February. We're hoping to have a draft housing plan in spring. So it's all very rapid succession.
Yeah.
Sadly, we wish we had more time to deliberate and to bring more people into the fold, but it's a sprint for all these communities in the Bay Area right now.
But, you know, also, Wendy, you were part of that group. We consider Age-Friendly Fairfax and allied organizations as real collaborators. And I can't tell you how excited we were coming out of that meeting. In fact, we reached out to Jody this week. So we're really looking forward to closing some of the loops and engaging more with your folks, because I have a strong feeling that we'll be getting a lot of those that input from your people and you and Jody and things like that. So we will definitely be circling back to you and working with you and coming up with some good policies and opportunities for discussion as part of the process to get to those.
Great, thank you.
Great, it looks like Veronica has her hand up.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, Ben and Andy. I just want to start by saying how grateful I am for the amount of depth of reaching out to the public and ensuring that there's lots of time to be able to answer questions, not just in this workshop, but leading up to this. I'm just very impressed and grateful for the inclusivity, and I really see you walking that. I was so curious, I'm curious right now to know, and it might not be a question for you all, but I bet you can direct me where I might be able to have it answered. How do, once we get to the point where the units are actually built and we have more affordable housing units, is there a plan for ensuring that they stay affordable? How does it, what regulation process occurs to ensure that they don't get marked up and push more people out of being able to afford living in Fairfax, if that makes sense?
Well, deed restriction is the most common method. And that can be for a period of time, or it can be in perpetuity. But that's also something that ends up getting tracked with each annual housing report that goes to HCD, or State Department of Housing and Community Development, in a way that it must be recorded whether or not there are affordable units at risk of losing that affordability restriction. So it could be 20, 50 years, or it could be in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And so that, as Ben mentioned earlier, the inclusionary requirements, that can have powerful consequences according to how that law is written. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, Ben, there's probably discussion about that currently, right?
Yeah, there's very much a lot of details associated with that. And so the designated affordable, I would just say, if we're building designated affordable, that would remain affordable for an extended period of time. There's also conversations about affordable by design. And, you know, in the conversations and discussions that I've had with other planners, that ADUs actually tend to tilt a little bit towards the affordability. Number one, you know, by virtue of their modest size typically, and the desire for people who live on the site to maybe not go for the absolute top dollar. So that's an example of something that tends to tilt towards a little bit more affordability. And then finally, you know, other conversations about affordability by design, and we're still, you know, in the early stages of exploring that, but things like smaller units when you're looking at multifamily would tend to be more affordable. And, just by virtue of the fact that, people pay for square footage. So if it's smaller, the market for that would be a little bit lower. So there's a variety of options, and we don't have the final answer on it now, but we're still working on it.
Thank you.
All right, so I think that was all. Oh, we have one more hand up. Kevin just raised his hand.
Hey, this one's for Ben. You've
Yes,
spoken
sir.
highly of this, the GIS tool. Is that supplied by ABAG or HCD? And if you have seen the one that the county has, which is pretty bare bones, I'm just kind of curious what information was supplied by HCD or ABAG on the back end that you're raving about that's helping you guys out. And will there be any guest access for the public? Thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving, guys.
You too. Andy, I think you could talk about the HES tool.
Yes, ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, has been working with a team of developers to create a map that helps us understand a little bit about constraints such as environmental constraints and things like that. And it's a good communication tool right now internally. And the idea is with their iterations over time, it will be, it's no longer beta, so it's maybe at 2.0 or 3.0 now, but by the time it gets to, I don't know, 6.0, then it'll be ready and available for the public to be able to interact with it. They were super helpful with us in creating the type of file that we needed to for Rachel Kane to then inform our map with the shapes. So it's a technical thing. It's a brand new to us file type called a GeoJSON, which so it's a GIS file that then gets put into a text file, and then when that text file gets shared with our balancing act, the group that we're working with to create this map, then we can see the shape, or we can draw the shape within the balancing act tool. And the balancing act tool was available by lottery for a number of communities. Unfortunately, not Fairfax. So Fairfax out of pocket purchased this software so that we could make it available to the public. And we're very grateful that council supported us and that Ben advocated for this. So thank you very much. It's helpful to have this visual analysis tool to share with the public. And we're excited about iterations over time so that we can be more and more clear about understanding what the community wants to see and where they want to see it.
Yeah, and locally, just in terms of what our GS specialist that we contract with here at the town, for example, who came up, we developed the one way in, one way out map with her, and that's still in the process of being refined. And I think we have some pretty significant GIS projects planned in the future. I don't want to, we're still kind of in the incipient stages of that, so I don't want to overpromise and under-deliver, but I'm pretty excited with the information and how it really helps us define issues and set boundaries around certain things. Just says, hey, for example, surprise, surprise, we know we've got a major evacuation problem in Upper Cascade. Well, we also can estimate how many houses that involves and how far they have to go and things like that. So we're developing that GIS knowledge as we go, and this is part of our program going forward.
All right, it looks like we have two final questions. Wendy, do you want to come up to the mic and ask your questions? And as a reminder, if you have any lingering questions or something comes up after the workshop, you can direct all of your questions to Fairfax Speaks. It'll get to the project team and we'll make sure that we answer those and post those answers as well. So Wendy, the mic is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for having all this time for questions. It's so wonderful. What I wanted to ask is, I'm in support of obviously is creating as much affordable housing as we can in Fairfax. And that said, I know that there's lots of people who don't want new structures built. I'm wondering if like Covia or like the home sharing sort of program, does it count if people who don't currently rent rooms out of their homes decide to rent a room, or is that too hard to monitor? And so that wouldn't be counted as a unit per se.
That's a great question. I wish it did count, but I'm afraid it's units. And that's true also for congregate care, or even like if there was a school here, dorms. So when something is counted by the number of beds or bedrooms rather than units, it doesn't count according to the regional housing needs allocations or arena number that it is assigned to Fairfax.
But I will also say that we're looking into co-housing options, and especially for seniors, because we know that can be a really good fit for our older adult population. I would love to be able to do something that works well for the people and also works for our numbers. And so I think that's a conversation we will continue to have with HCD, because those type of options where, I think somebody did earlier mention smaller units, and there's a lot of people that don't need a whole lot of square footage, but they might need some assistance with some of their life functions, and they maybe don't want to cook all their meals all by themselves. So there's options out there and that could work for them, and how they count remains to be determined.
Great, thanks.
All right, Michelle.
Hello. I don't even know where to start here, but I grew up in Fairfax in the 60s and 70s. I moved away and live in Eastern Washington, and I come back in the winter because my mom's still alive and still living in the house that I grew up in. So I have survived in my community, which is a forest community, 5 devastating fires so far. Our community has just survived since 2014. And I walk around Fairfax, which I love to do, and hit, in the hills. And I am so concerned about the fire risks in this area. And I see how people are not managing their fuel loads. The power lines are in the middle of trees. There's dead trees. No one is doing fire-wise, real serious fire-wise here. And that's one of the reasons I got on this call, okay, is so to express my deep concern for the safety of this town, and adding more additional people trying to flee in very limited time periods. Some of you think, oh, maybe you'll have 15 minutes or maybe they'll pre-evacuate. But truthfully, sometimes you don't have any minutes whatsoever. You are just like, the fire is at your neighbors and, you just got to go. And so, it all looks good and I know the firefighters are doing a much better job. Personally, I see it all the time about pre-evacuations, staying on top of it with the fires. But I also know that sometimes you don't have time for that. And that I'm not anti-housing at all, but what I am is anti-further housing and automobiles in the hills around the town, because all I see is risk. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that because I do have a lot of personal experience. And I love this town, even though I don't live here all the time. It is still my home. And, at a heart level. So, and thank you for letting me share that. And also thank you for this public process. This was really great that you guys had it available for people to participate. And I hope more people participate in the future. And so thank you. And thank you for just keeping this town so freaking awesome.
Well, it's the people that make the town awesome. We're just here on the sidelines. Michelle, you brought up so many good points, but I just want to allude to some of those and agree with most of them. But also, for example, Firewise, Fairfax has, I would say, is the county leader in Firewise and one of the leaders in the state. And there are, I think, 9 active Firewise groups. Now, one of the things, if you're using that term, you know what it's about. It's about volunteers. So, it's nobody's knocking up, walking up to somebody's door and saying, hey, you got a fuel ladder issue. Although, as you also pointed out, the fire department is doing inspections. I think they've pretty much inspected every home in Fairfax and given people a little report card. So I could say this, it's better than it was, a lot better. And it's not just, coming from people finally waking up when they smell, wildfire smoke for 3 months in the summer. It's people recognize that, yeah, we are extremely vulnerable. So there are some improvements. There's a long ways to go. There have been millions of dollars spent in fuel reduction programs, including in Fairfax. And you can see that on some of the hillsides, because if you've survived those fires, you know what a well-tended forest, without ladder fuels and with healthy trees and things like that looks like versus, a tangled, just flammables everywhere. We've got some unavoidable challenges because of the topography and the development pattern. And we're working really hard to try to avoid making that worse. And like I said, I think the town's SB 9 urgency ordinance, check it out. It'll be online in another week and it's going to the council on the 1st. And that's taking a really sober look at what our fire risks are and where that type of additional housing density is appropriate and where not. And that's not to say we oppose it, it's just where it is. And in terms of, people are doing things and our knowledge is really picking up steam. And I'll just throw out a term right now, shaded fuel break. We have one of the leading fire ecologists in the area, Ray Moritz, as our town arborist. And he's an absolute expert on this. And there's circumstances where a shaded forest can actually be safer than unshaded areas because grasses grow where there's sunlight and they tend to carry flames pretty well. So, we're developing that knowledge, and please, when you see those conversations come forward, and we just did a safety element presentation to the Planning Commission on the 18th. We will be discussing the safety element with the town council on December 15th. And that's talking to a great extent about fire. So this is a conversation that we're updating the safety element along with this housing element. We're really focusing on fire risks. And we're trying to come up with a safer community than we have now. And that might seem like the bar is pretty low, but I think we could do both things. I think we can provide additional housing, appropriate housing in appropriate locations, and leave this community safer than the way we found it. And to a certain extent, it's just what happens, some of those things are out of our control. That's why they call them disasters. So we're working on it.
Okay, guys. Well, that's all the hand raise. I think we tried to touch on most of the questions, but we'll do a deep dive and make sure we provide those written responses.
Yeah, I can see a lot of chat comments and the Q&A. So look for further details in the Fairfax Speak site.
Oh,
Sorry.
I do see one last hand. Michelle, did you want to just follow up briefly? There you go. You have the mic.
Actually, I'm sorry if I did raise my hand, but I appreciate your words. Definitely. And I'm really glad that you guys are actively looking at it. Just because of what I said earlier. And I may come to that meeting. Is it going to be the meeting on, I think you said the 15th about safety? Is that going to
Yes.
be another Zoom meeting?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe I could get an email, or is that going to be shared somewhere where we can participate?
What you do
Or
is you
can
just go to the Town of Fairfax website, like on the meetings on the 15th. It will be posted by Monday, usually a little earlier, but by Monday the 13th for sure. And that's got the Zoom link. So just go to the Town of Fairfax website, and you can get right to the Zoom link and participate that way.
All right, thank you. Thanks for all your hard work.
You're welcome.
All right, well, who wants to bring us home? Ben, Tamala, Andy?
Well, I just want to, again, just thank everybody for being such troopers and to taking your valuable time to participate and assist us. If I can assume that the survey is our honest reflection, and I think we can. I think you've gotten some information that a lot of you didn't have. And we look forward to continuing to partner with you going forward with this housing element. And Andy, do you have any other comments?
Oh, I would just echo that. Just we highly value your participation and hope you keep it up and share it with your friends and family and neighbors and community at large. We want this to reflect goals that you have for your community, and we value being part of this process.
And we'll see you soon.
And I do believe at this point that will conclude our workshop today. Please do remember to go to Fairfax Speaks, fairfaxspeaks.com. And once again, this is the Housing Element Update Workshop. Thank you again for joining us. Please do fill out that exit survey. It's your chance to rate us directly. All right, don't miss it. Thank you very much, and please check the website.
Good night.